In the vast pantheon of ancient Egyptian deities, few names carried the weight of celestial movement quite like Khonsu. The very utterance of his name evoked the eternal dance of the moon across the star-scattered canvas of night. Khonsu, derived from the ancient Egyptian kenes, meaning to traverse or to cross over, perfectly encapsulated the god's fundamental nature as the divine wanderer, the celestial traveller who embarked upon his nightly odyssey across the heavens. This etymology reveals far more than mere linguistic curiosity. It illuminates the ancient Egyptian understanding of lunar cycles as a perpetual journey, with Khonsu as the divine navigator steering the moon through its phases and positions. The earliest mentions of Khonsu emerge from the religious texts of the Old Kingdom, carved into pyramid walls and inscribed on papyri that have survived millennia. These initial references, dating to approximately 2686 to 2181 BC, present him as a formidable and somewhat dangerous deity, far removed from the benevolent young god he would later become. In the pyramid texts, Khonsu appears as Khonsu who lives on hearts, a terrifying figure who devoured the hearts and consumed the essence of other gods and mortals alike. This primordial version of the deity embodied the unpredictable and potentially destructive aspects of lunar power, reflecting ancient fears of the dark phases of the moon and the mysteries hidden within night's embrace. The transformation of Khonsu from this fearsome entity to the beloved moonchild occurred gradually through centuries of evolving religious thought. During the Middle Kingdom, his character began to soften, though he retained much of his lunar authority. However, it was during the New Kingdom, particularly from the 18th dynasty onward, that Khonsu truly flourished as a major deity. The rise of Thebes as Egypt's religious and political centre directly contributed to his elevated status, as he became intrinsically linked with the powerful Theban religious establishment. The divine conception of Khonsu represents one of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian theological development. According to the established mythology that crystallized during the New Kingdom, Khonsu emerged as the offspring of two of Egypt's most powerful deities, Amun, the hidden god who became king of the gods, and Mut, the fierce mother goddess whose name literally meant mother. This divine parentage was not merely symbolic, but carried profound theological implications for ancient Egyptian religious understanding. The conception myth describes how Amun, in his role as the creative force of the universe, united with Mut during a sacred cosmic event. Their union occurred not in earthly realms, but within the primordial waters of creation, where divine essence mingled with maternal power to produce their lunar child. Mut, depicted as a vulture goddess or as a woman wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, provided the nurturing maternal energy necessary for Khonsu's birth, while Amun contributed the divine spark that would make their son a god of considerable power. This divine triad, Amun, Mut and Khonsu, became known as the Theban Triad, representing the perfect nuclear family of the gods. Khonsu's position as the child deity served multiple religious and social functions. He embodied renewal, youth, and the cyclical nature of time itself. His youthful appearance, typically shown as a young man with the sidelock of youth or as a child, symbolized the moon's constant regeneration through its phases. Each month, as the moon waned to darkness and returned to fullness, Khonsu demonstrated the eternal promise of renewal and rebirth. The regional variations in Khonsu's origin story reveal the complex religious landscape of ancient Egypt, where local traditions often merged with broader theological concepts. In some Theban accounts, Khonsu's birth occurred when Amun took the form of a sacred bull, representing fertility and strength, while Mut transformed into a celestial cow, symbolizing nurturing motherhood and the sky itself. Their cosmic coupling produced Khonsu as a divine calf who immediately ascended to the heavens to begin his eternal journey across the night sky. Alternative regional traditions, particularly those preserved in Upper Egyptian communities, connected Khonsu to even more ancient lunar deities. Some texts suggest his origins lay in the worship of Ea, an earlier moon god whose cult predated the rise of Theban power. In these accounts, Khonsu absorbed the attributes and mythological significance of Aya, effectively replacing him as the primary lunar deity while incorporating elements of the older gods' worship and mythology. The connection to pre-existing moon deities extended beyond Ea to include Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, who also possessed lunar associations. In certain regional variations, Khonsu's birth involved a complex divine genealogy where he inherited aspects of lunar wisdom from Thoth, while maintaining his primary identity as the son of Amun and Mut. These overlapping mythologies demonstrate how Egyptian religion evolved through synthesis rather than replacement, with newer deities incorporating and transforming older religious concepts. Local Theban traditions added their own distinctive elements to Khonsu's birth narrative. According to these accounts, his divine conception occurred during the annual Opet festival, when the boundaries between divine and earthly realms became permeable. The festival's celebration of divine fertility and renewal provided the perfect cosmic conditions for Khonsu's emergence into the pantheon. Some versions describe how his birth coincided with a particularly brilliant full moon that illuminated the Theban temples with unprecedented radiance, marking the arrival of the new lunar deity. The physical manifestations of Khonsu's divine nature became apparent from the moment of his birth. Ancient texts describe how he emerged from the cosmic union, bearing the distinctive attributes that would define his iconography throughout Egyptian history. His skin possessed a silvery luminescence that reflected his lunar nature, while his eyes held the depth of night sky filled with stars. The sidelock of youth that adorned his head was said to shimmer with moonbeams, and his limbs moved with the fluid grace of celestial bodies in their orbits. The timing of Khonsu's emergence as a major deity coincided with significant developments in Egyptian astronomical knowledge and religious practice. During the New Kingdom, Egyptian priests had developed sophisticated methods for tracking lunar cycles and predicting eclipses. This increased understanding of lunar mechanics enhanced Khonsu's religious significance, as he became not merely a mythological figure, but a deity whose movements could be observed, predicted, and celebrated through ritual. The theological implications of Khonsu's divine parentage extended far beyond simple family relationships. As the son of Amun, he inherited aspects of creative power and hidden knowledge. Amun's nature as the hidden one meant that Khonsu possessed access to mysteries concealed from ordinary mortals and even from other deities. This hidden wisdom manifested in his ability to influence dreams, prophecy, and the subtle workings of fate that occurred under cover of darkness. From Mut, Khonsu inherited protective instincts and maternal concern for humanity. Despite his youth, he possessed an ancient wisdom regarding the nurturing aspects of divine power. This maternal inheritance explained his later development as a healing deity and protector of travellers, roles that seemed to contradict his youthful appearance but made perfect sense given his divine lineage. The establishment of Khonsu within the Theban Triad represented more than religious organisation. It reflected fundamental Egyptian concepts about divine order and cosmic balance. The triad structure mirrored earthly family units while demonstrating how divine relationships maintained universal harmony. Amun provided creative force and authority. Mut offered protective nurturing, and Khonsu embodied the promise of continuity and renewal that made their divine rule eternal. Regional variations in worship practices reflected local understanding of Khonsu's origins and nature. In some areas, his birth was celebrated annually with festivals that recreated the cosmic events surrounding his divine conception. These celebrations involved elaborate rituals where priests reenacted the union of Amun and Mut, culminating in the symbolic birth of their lunar child as represented by the rising of the full moon. The religious architecture of Thebes during the New Kingdom reflected a sophisticated theological understanding that placed divine family relationships at the centre of cosmic order. Within this sacred geography, Khonsu occupied a unique position as the divine child, whose very existence validated and perpetuated the supreme authority of his parents. The Theban Triad represented far more than a convenient grouping of deities. It embodied the fundamental Egyptian concept of divine governance through familial harmony, where each member contributed essential elements to the maintenance of universal balance. Amun's role as the hidden king of gods established the foundational authority from which the entire triad derived its power. His name, meaning the hidden one, reflected his nature as the unknowable creative force that existed before creation itself. Unlike other Egyptian deities whose domains could be clearly defined and understood, Amun's authority transcended specific categories, encompassing all aspects of divine kingship while remaining mysteriously beyond complete comprehension. This hidden quality made him the perfect divine father for Khonsu, whose lunar nature involved constant transformation between visible and invisible states as the moon waxed and waned through its cycles. The relationship between father and son operated on multiple theological levels that ancient Egyptian priests carefully articulated through ritual and myth. Amun's creative power manifested through Khonsu's nightly journey across the heavens, demonstrating how divine authority perpetuated itself through generational transfer. Each night, as Khonsu emerged to begin his celestial traverse, he carried forward his father's creative essence, ensuring that divine power remained active and engaged with the world rather than distant and abstract. This dynamic relationship meant that Amun's authority was not static but continuously renewed through his son's activities. Mut's position within the triad provided the essential maternal element that transformed a simple father-son relationship into a complete divine family unit. Her fierce protective nature, symbolized by her vulture form and lioness associations, created a sacred boundary around the family unit that preserved its integrity against chaotic forces. As the divine mother, Mut possessed the authority to nurture and protect not only her own child, but all those who fell under the triad's protection. Her maternal wisdom complemented Amun's hidden knowledge, providing practical guidance for the administration of divine justice and the maintenance of cosmic order. The theological significance of Mut's motherhood extended beyond simple nurturing to encompass the creative aspects of divine femininity. Ancient Egyptian religious texts describe how her womb served as the cosmic space where Amun's creative energy took physical form through Khonsu's conception. This understanding made her not merely a passive recipient of divine seed, but an active participant in the creative process, whose own divine essence contributed essential qualities to their lunar child. Her maternal authority granted her the right to intervene in cosmic affairs when threats emerged against the established order. Khonsu's position as the divine child created a complex theological dynamic that challenged conventional understanding of youth and authority. Despite his youthful appearance, complete with a distinctive side lock that marked him as a child deity, Khonsu possessed considerable independent power that complemented rather than competed with his parents' authority. His youth represented not weakness or subordination, but the eternal principle of renewal that kept the divine order fresh and responsive to changing cosmic conditions. The symbolic significance of Khonsu's eternal youth operated on multiple levels within Egyptian religious thought. His youthful form demonstrated that divine power did not diminish through generational transfer, but instead gained vitality and relevance through renewal. Each lunar cycle represented a complete life cycle compressed into a month, with Khonsu dying during the new moon phase and being reborn as the crescent appeared. This constant regeneration made him the perfect symbol for the continuation of divine authority across generations, showing how established power could maintain its effectiveness through periodic renewal. The contrast between Khonsu's youthful appearance and his parents' mature divine authority created a dynamic tension that energized the entire triad. Amun and Mut represented established, proven, divine power that had demonstrated its effectiveness through eons of cosmic governance. Their mature authority provided stability and continuity, ensuring that divine rule remained consistent and reliable. Khonsu's youth introduced the element of change and adaptation, allowing the Triad to respond to new challenges and evolving cosmic conditions without abandoning the fundamental principles that made their rule legitimate. This generational dynamic reflected broader Egyptian concepts about the relationship between tradition and innovation. The Triad demonstrated how divine authority could maintain its essential character while adapting to changing circumstances through the integration of youthful energy. Khonsu's lunar nature made him particularly suited for this role, as the moon's constant changes provided a natural metaphor for adaptive authority that remained fundamentally stable despite surface transformations. Ritual narratives preserved in temple inscriptions and religious papyri provide detailed accounts of how the three deities interacted in their shared divine responsibilities. These texts describe elaborate cosmic conferences where Amun, Mut, and Khonsu deliberated on matters affecting both divine and mortal realms. During these divine consultations, each member of the Triad contributed their unique perspective and authority to reach decisions that reflected the full scope of divine wisdom and power. The allocation of divine responsibilities among the Triad members followed patterns that reinforced their individual natures while emphasizing their collective authority. Amun typically addressed matters requiring creative intervention or the establishment of new cosmic principles. His hidden nature made him particularly effective in situations where divine action needed to remain subtle, or where the full scope of divine intention should not be immediately apparent to mortals or other deities. Mut's responsibilities centered on protective actions and the maintenance of established order against threats. Her fierce maternal instincts made her the natural choice for confronting forces that threatened the stability of divine rule or the safety of those under the Triad's protection. Temple texts describe numerous occasions where Mut took direct action against chaotic entities, using her lioness strength and vulture swiftness to eliminate threats before they could destabilize cosmic harmony. Khonsu's divine responsibilities focused on communication, healing, and the mediation of divine will to mortal realms. His nightly journey across the heavens positioned him as the primary interface between divine and earthly spheres, carrying messages and influences from the hidden realms of divine authority to the visible world where mortals could perceive and respond to divine guidance. His youthful nature made him more approachable than his parents, allowing mortals to petition divine authority through a figure who seemed less intimidating than the awesome power represented by Amun and Mut. The mythological narratives describing family interactions reveal sophisticated theological concepts about the nature of divine relationships. Unlike human families, where relationships could be strained by competing interests or limited resources, the divine family operated through perfect harmony based on complementary rather than competitive authority. Each member's power enhanced rather than diminished the others, creating a synergistic effect that made their collective authority greater than the sum of their individual capabilities. One particularly significant mythological cycle describes the annual renewal of the Triad's authority through a cosmic ritual that coincided with the flooding of the Nile. According to these accounts, Amun would temporarily withdraw his active presence from the world, allowing chaos to begin encroaching on established order. Mut would then marshal her protective forces to maintain essential stability, while Khonsu embarked on a special celestial mission to retrieve the hidden knowledge necessary for cosmic renewal. This mythological pattern reflected the Egyptian understanding of how divine authority maintained itself through periodic renewal rather than static permanence. The temporary withdrawal of Amun's direct influence created space for his family members to demonstrate their own divine capabilities while ultimately reinforcing his supreme authority through their successful completion of their assigned roles. The cycle concluded with a cosmic reunion where the three deities celebrated their renewed unity and the restoration of full divine authority over the cosmos. The theological implications of these family dynamics extended far beyond the immediate concerns of the Theban religious establishment. The Triad model provided a template for understanding how divine authority operated throughout the Egyptian pantheon, with other deity groups adopting similar family structures to organize their own spheres of influence. The success of the Theban Triad in maintaining cosmic order while adapting to changing historical circumstances demonstrated the effectiveness of familial divine governance. Regional variations in the worship of the Theban Triad revealed how local communities understood and interpreted the family dynamics according to their specific needs and circumstances. In agricultural regions, the family relationships were often interpreted through seasonal metaphors, with Amun representing the hidden fertility of soil, Mut embodying the protective earth that nurtured crops, and Khonsu symbolizing the lunar cycles that guided planting and harvesting activities. Urban communities developed different interpretations that emphasized the administrative aspects of divine family governance. In these contexts, Amun appeared as the supreme executive authority, Mut as the protective judicial power, and Khonsu as the communicative legislative force that translated divine will into practical guidance for human society. These varied interpretations demonstrated the flexibility of the triad concept while maintaining its essential theological coherence. The influence of the Theban Triad extended beyond purely religious considerations to shape Egyptian concepts of ideal, family relationships, and social organization. The perfect harmony demonstrated by Amun, Mut, and Khonsu provided a model for human families, showing how different generations could work together effectively when each member understood and fulfilled their appropriate role within the family structure. The transformation of Khonsu from divine child to cosmic navigator occurred through his assumption of one of the most demanding roles in the Egyptian pantheon, the nightly pilgrimage across the star-filled expanse of heaven as the living embodiment of the moon itself. This celestial responsibility required far more than simple movement through space. It demanded the precise orchestration of lunar phases, the maintenance of cosmic timing, and the delicate balance between light and darkness that governed both divine and mortal existence. Ancient Egyptian astronomical texts describe this journey not as a passive drift through the heavens, but as an active expedition requiring constant vigilance, divine strength, and unwavering dedication to the cosmic order established by the gods. The mythological framework surrounding Khonsu's nightly voyage reveals sophisticated Egyptian understanding of lunar mechanics wrapped in religious narrative. According to the most detailed accounts preserved in New Kingdom temple inscriptions, Khonsu's celestial journey began each evening at the moment when Ra's solar bark disappeared below the western horizon. The transition from day to night created a cosmic opening through which Khonsu could emerge from the hidden realms where he spent the daylight hours, appearing first as a thin crescent that gradually expanded as he gained strength and authority over the darkened sky. The physical manifestation of this journey involved Khonsu's transformation from his earthly form as a youthful god into his celestial aspect as the moon itself. Temple reliefs depict this metamorphosis as a gradual process where his human-like divine body became increasingly luminous until it achieved the silvery radiance characteristic of moonlight. His distinctive side lock of youth would begin to glow with ethereal light, while his skin took on the pale luminescence that allowed him to illuminate the night sky. The crescent moon crown that adorned his head during earthly appearances would expand and intensify until it encompassed his entire being, transforming him into the celestial orb that mortals observed moving across the heavens. The mythological geography of Khonsu's nightly journey encompassed specific celestial landmarks and cosmic territories that ancient Egyptian astronomers had identified through centuries of careful observation. His route began in the eastern sky, where he emerged from the underworld through a cosmic gateway guarded by serpentine entities that challenged his right to traverse the heavens. These guardian creatures, described in religious texts as having eyes like stars and scales that reflected cosmic light, required Khonsu to demonstrate his divine authority through displays of lunar power before allowing him passage into the night sky. The eastern portion of his journey represented the phase of increasing strength, corresponding to the waxing moon that mortals observed growing larger each night. During this segment of his cosmic voyage, Khonsu encountered various stellar deities who served as waypoints and sources of cosmic energy. The constellation deities, depicted as divine figures whose bodies were composed of stars, provided guidance and celestial fuel that sustained Khonsu's luminous power throughout his journey. These interactions were described as cosmic conversations, where stellar wisdom was exchanged for lunar influence, creating a network of divine communication that maintained harmony among all celestial bodies. The central portion of Khonsu's nightly traverse occurred when he reached the zenith of the sky, corresponding to the full moon phase when his power achieved maximum intensity. At this cosmic high point, ancient texts describe how Khonsu's divine authority expanded to encompass the entire night sky, with his lunar radiance reaching every corner of the visible world. This moment of supreme celestial power allowed him to perform his most important divine functions, including the healing of the sick, the guidance of travellers, and the protection of those who called upon his name during the dark hours. The mythological accounts of Khonsu's interactions with other celestial deities during his nightly journey reveal complex theological relationships that governed the cosmic order. His encounters with the star gods followed established protocols that maintained celestial hierarchy while allowing for collaborative divine action. The circumpolar stars, known as the imperishable ones because they never set below the horizon, served as permanent advisors who provided Khonsu with information about cosmic conditions and potential threats to celestial harmony. The relationship between Khonsu's lunar journey and the movements of planetary deities created additional layers of mythological complexity. Ancient Egyptian astronomical texts describe how the planets, each as associated with specific deities, would occasionally intersect with Khonsu's celestial path, creating cosmic conferences where divine policies were established and cosmic adjustments were made. These planetary encounters were interpreted as significant omens that could influence earthly events, with priests carefully tracking and recording these celestial meetings to provide guidance for royal decision-making and religious observances. The western portion of Khonsu's journey represented the phase of declining power, corresponding to the waning moon that gradually diminished as he approached his cosmic destination. This segment of his voyage involved different challenges and responsibilities, as Khonsu prepared to transfer his accumulated celestial experiences to the underworld deities who governed the hidden aspects of cosmic order. The gradual reduction of his luminous power was not interpreted as weakness, but as a necessary preparation for his eventual death and rebirth that would begin the lunar cycle anew. The mythological significance of Khonsu's waxing and waning phases extended far beyond simple astronomical observation to encompass fundamental Egyptian concepts about the nature of existence, death, and renewal. The waxing moon represented the growth of divine power and the accumulation of cosmic energy that could be directed toward beneficial purposes. During these periods, Khonsu's increasing luminosity symbolized the expansion of life force, the healing of illness, and the strengthening of protective influences that shielded mortals from harmful supernatural forces. The full moon phase represented the culmination of divine power and the moment when the boundary between earthly and celestial realms became most permeable. Ancient texts describe how Khonsu's maximum luminosity created cosmic conditions that enhanced magical practices, facilitated communication with deceased spirits, and allowed for the most effective performance of healing rituals. The intense lunar radiance that characterized this phase was understood to carry concentrated divine essence that could transform both physical and spiritual conditions for those who properly accessed its influence. The waning moon phases carried equally important but different mythological significance, representing the necessary process of divine sacrifice and cosmic preparation for renewal. As Khonsu's luminosity gradually decreased, ancient Egyptians understood this diminishment as his deliberate offering of accumulated cosmic energy to sustain the universal order. The darkening moon demonstrated how even divine beings participated in the cyclical processes of death and rebirth that governed all existence. The new moon phase, when Khonsu became invisible in the night sky, represented his temporary death and journey through the underworld, where he underwent the regenerative processes necessary for his eventual rebirth. This period of lunar invisibility was interpreted not as absence, but as hidden activity, with Khonsu engaging in cosmic work that could not be observed by mortal eyes. Temple texts describe his underworld activities as including consultations with Osiris about the fate of deceased souls, negotiations with chaos entities to maintain cosmic stability, and the gathering of regenerative energy that would fuel his next lunar cycle. The cyclical nature of Khonsu's death and rebirth provided ancient Egyptians with a powerful metaphor for understanding their own mortality and the promise of afterlife continuation. The regular return of the crescent moon after each period of invisibility demonstrated that death was not permanent extinction, but temporary transition leading to renewed existence. This lunar model of death and rebirth influenced Egyptian funerary practices, with many burial rituals timed to coincide with specific lunar phases that would maximize the deceased's chances of successful regeneration in the afterlife. The relationship between Khonsu's lunar cycles and Egyptian concepts of time created additional theological complexity that influenced both religious and civil calendars. The monthly cycle of lunar phases provided a natural unit for measuring time that complemented the annual solar cycle associated with Ra's yearly journey. This dual temporal system allowed ancient Egyptians to coordinate both short-term and long-term planning while maintaining proper relationships with the divine forces that govern temporal progression. The mythological accounts of Khonsu's interactions with Ra during the transitions between day and night reveal sophisticated theological understanding of how different divine authorities coordinated their cosmic responsibilities. These solar-lunar encounters occurred at the liminal moments of dawn and dusk, when the boundaries between day and night became fluid and both deities needed to negotiate the transfer of cosmic authority. The mythological narratives describe these transitions as carefully choreographed divine ceremonies where Ra and Khonsu exchanged cosmic intelligence and coordinated their respective influences over earthly affairs. The dawn encounter between Ra and Khonsu typically occurred as the solar deity prepared to begin his daily journey across the sky, while the lunar god concluded his nightly voyage. Ancient texts describe this meeting as a cosmic debriefing where Khonsu reported on the events and conditions he had observed during the night hours, while Ra provided information about the divine plans and cosmic adjustments that would influence the coming day. These exchanges ensured continuity of divine awareness and prevented conflicts between solar and lunar influences that could disrupt cosmic harmony. The dusk encounter represented a different type of divine interaction, with Ra transferring cosmic authority to Khonsu as the solar bark disappeared below the western horizon. This transition required careful coordination to prevent any gap in divine oversight that chaos entities might exploit to threaten established order. The mythological accounts describe elaborate protocols governing this transfer, with specific ritual words and cosmic gestures that validated Khonsu's assumption of nighttime authority, while ensuring Ra's successful passage into the underworld for his own regenerative journey. The symbolic connection between Khonsu's lunar travels and the navigation of deceased souls through the afterlife created one of the most significant aspects of his mythological role. Ancient Egyptian funerary texts describe how the souls of the dead followed lunar pathways through the underworld, using Khonsu's celestial route as a guide for their own journey toward judgment and potential regeneration. This connection transformed Khonsu's nightly voyage from simple astronomical phenomenon into a cosmic roadmap that provided deceased souls with divine guidance during their most vulnerable period of existence. The practical implications of this symbolic relationship influenced Egyptian burial practices and funerary preparations in numerous ways. Tomb decorations frequently included lunar imagery and references to Khonsu's protective guidance, while burial goods often contained amulets and texts designed to invoke his assistance during the deceased's underworld journey. The timing of funeral rituals was carefully coordinated with lunar phases to maximize the beneficial influence of Khonsu's cosmic presence, with full moon burials considered particularly auspicious for ensuring successful afterlife transition. The mythological framework describing how deceased souls accessed Khonsu's guidance reveals complex theological concepts about the relationship between cosmic order and individual destiny. According to these accounts, souls that had lived according to divine principles could perceive and follow the lunar pathways that Khonsu illuminated during his nightly journey, while those who had violated cosmic order found themselves unable to access this divine guidance and were forced to navigate the dangerous underworld without celestial assistance. The transformation of Khonsu from celestial navigator to divine physician represents one of the most remarkable evolutionary developments in Egyptian religious thought. His healing abilities emerged naturally from his lunar associations, as ancient Egyptian medical practitioners had long observed the connection between lunar cycles and human health. The moon's influence on bodily fluids, mental states, and the healing process itself made Khonsu an obvious candidate for medical divine intervention. However, his reputation as a healer extended far beyond simple lunar sympathies to encompass extraordinary miraculous powers that could cure ailments no earthly physician could address. The earliest documented accounts of Khonsu's healing abilities appear in Middle Kingdom medical papyri, where his name is invoked alongside traditional remedies for treating mental disturbances and supernatural afflictions. These texts describe cases where patients suffering from what modern medicine might recognize as psychological disorders experienced dramatic recoveries after ritual, appeals to Khonsu's divine intervention. The ancient Egyptian understanding of mental illness often attributed such conditions to supernatural causes, possession by malevolent spirits, curses cast by enemies, or divine punishment for religious transgressions. Khonsu's lunar nature made him uniquely qualified to address these supernatural ailments, as his nightly journey through both visible and hidden realms gave him authority over the liminal spaces where such afflictions originated. The most detailed accounts of Khonsu's therapeutic interventions describe his ability to enter the dreams and mental landscapes of afflicted individuals, confronting the supernatural entities responsible for their suffering. Temple inscriptions from Thebes preserve elaborate narratives of these psychic battles, where Khonsu would manifest within the patient's consciousness as a luminous figure wielding lunar light as a weapon against possessing demons. These internal confrontations were described as cosmic dramas played out within the human mind, with the patient's recovery dependent on Khonsu's success in driving out the malevolent forces that had invaded their mental territory. The therapeutic process typically began with elaborate ritual preparations conducted by priest-physicians who served as intermediaries between the afflicted individual and the divine healer. These medical priests, known as servants of Khonsu, underwent extensive training in both traditional medical techniques and the specific ritual procedures necessary to invoke the god's healing intervention. The preparation phase involved purification ceremonies for both patient and priest, the creation of protective amulets bearing Khonsu's image and sacred names, and the performance of lunar observations to determine the most auspicious timing for the healing ritual. The actual healing ceremony required the patient to be placed in a state of ritual sleep, during which Khonsu could access their consciousness without interference from waking thoughts or fears. This induced slumber was achieved through a combination of herbal preparations, rhythmic chanting, and the manipulation of lighting conditions to simulate the lunar environment where Khonsu's power was strongest. Temple records describe how the healing chamber would be arranged to replicate cosmic conditions, with silver reflectors positioned to create shifting patterns of light and shadow that mimicked the moon's phases throughout the night. During the critical phase of divine intervention, witnesses reported observing physical manifestations of Khonsu's presence within the healing chamber. These supernatural phenomena included the appearance of silvery light that seemed to emanate from the patient's body, the sound of distant music that resembled celestial harmonies, and the sensation of cool breezes that carried the scent of night-blooming flowers associated with lunar deities. The most dramatic cases involved visible transformations in the patient's appearance, with their skin taking on a temporary luminous quality that reflected Khonsu's divine influence working within their system. The famous diplomatic healing mission involving the Bakhtan princess represents the pinnacle of Khonsu's international reputation as a divine physician. This extraordinary episode, preserved in detailed hieroglyphic inscriptions on the walls of Khonsu's temple at Karnak, demonstrates how his healing powers transcended national boundaries and established his reputation throughout the ancient Near East. The narrative begins with a diplomatic marriage between an Egyptian pharaoh and a princess from the kingdom of Bakhtan, located in the mountainous regions beyond Egypt's traditional sphere of influence. The Bakhtan princess, whose name translates as "she who belongs to the mountain peaks," arrived in Egypt as part of a political alliance designed to strengthen Egypt's northeastern borders against Assyrian expansion. However, shortly after her arrival in the Egyptian court, she began experiencing severe mental disturbances that Egyptian court physicians could not cure through conventional treatments. Her symptoms included violent mood swings, prophetic utterances in unknown languages, and periods of cataleptic rigidity that lasted for days. The Egyptian medical establishment, despite their considerable expertise, found themselves completely unable to address her condition. The princess's affliction created a serious diplomatic crisis, as her father, the king of Bakhtan, interpreted her illness as evidence that the Egyptian gods had rejected the alliance, or that Egyptian sorcerers had cursed his daughter. Diplomatic correspondence preserved in the royal archives reveals the mounting tension between the two kingdoms as the princess's condition deteriorated and conventional treatments proved ineffective. The Egyptian pharaoh, faced with the potential collapse of a crucial military alliance, turned to his religious advisors for divine intervention. The consultation with Egypt's highest-ranking priests revealed that the princess's affliction was supernatural in nature, caused by a powerful demon that had followed her from her homeland and taken possession of her consciousness during the stress of cultural transition. This entity, described in the texts as a mountain spirit with the ability to manipulate human thoughts and emotions, had established itself within the princess's mind and was using her as a conduit to influence Egyptian court politics. The conventional Egyptian exorcism rituals proved inadequate against this foreign supernatural entity, requiring divine intervention of the highest order. The decision to invoke Khonsu's assistance came after extensive divination procedures confirmed that only a deity with authority over both lunar and terrestrial realms could successfully confront the possessing spirit. The formal petition to Khonsu required elaborate diplomatic protocols, as the god's intervention in an international medical crisis carried significant theological and political implications. The pharaoh personally conducted the initial appeal, offering substantial temple endowments and promising the construction of new shrines dedicated to Khonsu's healing aspects in exchange for his divine assistance. Khonsu's response to the royal petition manifested through a series of prophetic dreams experienced by his high priest, who received detailed instructions for conducting the healing ritual. These divine communications specified that the princess's cure would require Khonsu's physical manifestation in a specially consecrated statue that would serve as his earthly vessel during the healing process. The The creation of this therapeutic statue involved the most skilled artisans in Egypt, working with materials that included silver from Nubian mines, electrum from the eastern desert, and precious stones that had been blessed during specific lunar phases. The completed statue depicted Khonsu in his aspect as divine physician, showing him as a young man with the traditional sidelock of youth, but bearing additional attributes that emphasized his healing powers. His hands were positioned in gestures of blessing and protection, while his face bore an expression of compassionate determination. The statue's eyes were inlaid with rock crystal that had been specially prepared to reflect moonlight, creating the impression that Khonsu was actively observing and responding to the conditions around him. The transportation of the therapeutic statue from Egypt to Bakhtan required an elaborate diplomatic expedition that combined religious ceremony with international diplomacy. The statue travelled in a specially constructed shrine boat that replicated the cosmic bark used by Khonsu during his nightly celestial journey. This mobile temple was accompanied by a full complement of priest-physicians, diplomatic officials, and military escorts, creating a procession that demonstrated Egypt's commitment to the healing mission while showcasing the power and sophistication of Egyptian religious technology. The arrival of Khonsu's statue in Bakhtan created immediate supernatural effects that were witnessed by both Egyptian and Bakhtan officials. Contemporary accounts describe how the princess's violent symptoms subsided as soon as the statue entered her presence, while the oppressive atmospheric conditions that had plagued the royal palace since her illness began suddenly cleared. The possessing demon's presence became visibly manifest as a dark shadow that seemed to recoil from the statue's luminous influence, setting the stage for the climactic confrontation between divine healer and supernatural affliction. The actual healing ritual conducted in the Bakhtan palace combined Egyptian therapeutic techniques with local religious traditions, creating a unique synthesis that respected both cultures while maximizing the effectiveness of Khonsu's intervention. The ceremony began at sunset and continued throughout the night, following the natural progression of lunar phases to build divine power gradually. The princess was placed in a ritual chamber adjacent to the statue, while priest-physicians from both kingdoms maintained continuous prayers and incantations designed to strengthen Khonsu's manifestation while weakening the demon's hold on the patient. The climactic moment of the healing occurred during the deepest part of the night, when Khonsu's lunar power reached its peak intensity. Witnesses reported seeing brilliant flashes of silver light emanating from the statue, accompanied by sounds of cosmic battle as the divine physician confronted the possessing entity within the princess's consciousness. The demon's expulsion was marked by a thunderous roar that seemed to come from the earth itself, followed by a profound silence that indicated the supernatural conflict had reached its conclusion. The princess's recovery was immediate and complete, with her consciousness returning to normal clarity as the possessing demon fled back to its mountain stronghold. Her first words upon awakening were expressions of gratitude to Khonsu, spoken in perfect Egyptian despite her previous inability to communicate coherently in any language. The successful healing not only restored her health, but also strengthened the diplomatic alliance between Egypt and Bakhtan, as the Bakhtan king recognized the superior power of Egyptian divine medicine and agreed to expand the treaty relationship. The international implications of this healing mission extended far beyond the immediate diplomatic success to establish Khonsu's reputation throughout the ancient Near East as a divine physician capable of addressing supernatural ailments that local deities could not cure. News of the Bakhtan princess's recovery spread through diplomatic channels to kingdoms throughout the region, creating demand for Egyptian medical assistance and enhancing Egypt's soft power influence through religious and therapeutic expertise. The mythological narratives surrounding Khonsu's battles against demons and evil spirits reveal sophisticated Egyptian understanding of supernatural pathology and divine therapeutic intervention. These accounts describe a cosmic taxonomy of malevolent entities, each requiring different approaches and divine weapons for successful elimination. The demons that caused mental illness were distinguished from those responsible for physical ailments, while entities that possessed individuals were classified separately from those that merely influenced their behaviour from external positions. The most dangerous category of supernatural afflictions involved demons that originated in foreign lands and carried with them the spiritual contamination of alien religious systems. These entities were particularly resistant to conventional Egyptian exorcism techniques because they operated according to different supernatural principles and could not be controlled through traditional Egyptian magical formulas. Khonsu's success against such foreign demons derived from his lunar nature, which gave him authority over the liminal spaces between different cosmic systems where these entities established their footholds. The therapeutic weapons available to Khonsu in his battles against supernatural ailments included both direct divine power and subtle psychological influences that work through the patient's own mental processes. His lunar light could penetrate the darkest recesses of consciousness where demons concealed themselves, while his youthful appearance made him less threatening to patients whose mental state had been destabilized by supernatural attack. The combination of overwhelming divine power and compassionate accessibility made him uniquely effective in therapeutic situations that required both strength and sensitivity. The connection between lunar cycles and healing practices in Egyptian medical religious traditions created a sophisticated system of therapeutic timing that maximized the effectiveness of divine intervention. Different types of ailments were treated during specific lunar phases when Khonsu's power was most appropriately configured for addressing particular categories of supernatural affliction. Mental disorders were typically addressed during the waxing moon when Khonsu's increasing power could gradually strengthen the patient's consciousness against possessing entities, while physical ailments often required treatment during the full moon when his divine energy reached maximum intensity. The waning moon phases were reserved for the most dangerous therapeutic procedures, including the treatment of patients whose conditions involved multiple possessing entities or demons of exceptional power. During these periods, Khonsu's diminishing lunar presence created cosmic conditions that made supernatural entities more vulnerable to divine attack, as they could not draw upon the full strength of lunar energy to resist therapeutic intervention. The timing of these procedures required precise astronomical calculations to ensure that the healing ritual coincided with the optimal cosmic conditions for successful divine intervention. The gentle healer who had saved the Bakhtan princess possessed another face entirely, one that emerged when cosmic order faced existential threats or when divine justice demanded swift and merciless execution. This transformation from benevolent physician to terrifying warrior deity represented one of the most dramatic metamorphoses in the Egyptian pantheon, revealing how lunar power could manifest as both nurturing light and destructive force depending on the cosmic circumstances requiring divine intervention. The earliest references to Khonsu's warrior aspects appear in the pyramid texts, where he's described as Khonsu who lives on hearts, a fearsome entity whose very sustenance derived from consuming the vital essence of his enemies. These ancient inscriptions present a deity whose lunar nature encompassed not only the gentle illumination of night, but also the predatory darkness that hunted supernatural threats to cosmic stability. The transformation typically occurred during the new moon phase, when Khonsu's invisible presence in the night sky masked his activities as divine executioner, allowing him to strike against enemies of the gods without warning or mercy. The physical manifestation of Khonsu's warrior transformation involved dramatic changes to his normally youthful and approachable appearance. Contemporary temple reliefs depict this metamorphosis as beginning with the darkening of his luminous skin, which shifted from silvery moonlight radiance to the deep blue-black colour of the midnight sky. His eyes, normally gentle and healing-focused, became burning points of stellar fire that could penetrate supernatural disguises and perceive the true nature of chaotic entities attempting to infiltrate the ordered cosmos. The traditional sidelock of youth that marked his divine childhood would writhe and twist like a living serpent, while his hands extended razor-sharp claws capable of tearing through both physical and spiritual substance. The crescent moon crown that adorned his head during peaceful periods would expand and sharpen into a weapon resembling a curved blade, its edges gleaming with concentrated lunar energy that could slice through the strongest supernatural defences. His normally slender build would swell with divine muscle and supernatural strength, transforming him from a graceful youth into a formidable warrior whose physical presence alone could intimidate lesser deities and send demons fleeing in terror. The transformation completed itself with the manifestation of wings that resembled those of a hunting hawk, allowing him to pursue fleeing enemies across any terrain or dimensional boundary. The mythological accounts of Khonsu's role as divine executioner reveal a sophisticated theological understanding of how cosmic justice operated through supernatural enforcement mechanisms. Unlike human legal systems that relied on evidence and deliberation, divine justice functioned through omniscient awareness of guilt and immediate punishment of cosmic crimes. Khonsu's transformation into his terrible aspect occurred automatically when the cosmic order detected threats that required elimination rather than correction, making him an instrument of divine wrath that operated beyond conventional moral considerations. The categories of enemies that triggered Khonsu's warrior transformation included demons that had escaped from their assigned underworld territories, rogue deities who had abandoned their cosmic responsibilities, and supernatural entities that sought to corrupt or destroy the fundamental principles governing universal order. These threats were distinguished from ordinary criminals or misguided mortals who remained subject to conventional divine judgment and potential redemption. The enemies that faced Khonsu's wrath had crossed theological boundaries that placed them beyond the reach of mercy or rehabilitation. The most detailed accounts of Khonsu's battles against cosmic enemies describe his confrontations with the Apep spawn, lesser serpentine entities that had broken away from the great Chaos Serpent during its eternal struggle against Ra's solar bark. These creatures possessed the ability to corrupt divine energy and transform it into chaotic force, making them particularly dangerous to the stability of cosmic order. Their presence in the ordered universe created zones of supernatural contamination that could spread like infection if not immediately contained and eliminated. The detection of Apep spawn infiltration typically occurred during Khonsu's nightly celestial journey, when his lunar senses could perceive the distortions they created in the cosmic fabric. The contaminated areas appeared to his divine vision as dark patches in the stellar field, where the normal patterns of divine energy had been twisted into chaotic configurations. Upon discovering such contamination, Khonsu would immediately begin his warrior transformation, preparing for battle against enemies whose very existence threatened the fundamental structure of reality. The actual combat against Apep spawn required specialized divine techniques that could neutralize their corruption abilities while preventing their chaotic essence from spreading to uncontaminated areas. Khonsu's lunar claws could slice through their serpentine bodies without being corrupted by contact with their chaotic substance, while his burning stellar eyes could track their movements even when they attempted to hide within dimensional folds or temporal distortions. The battles typically occurred in the liminal spaces between ordered reality and primordial chaos, where conventional physical laws held limited authority and divine power operated according to more fundamental cosmic principles. The destruction of each Apep spawn required Khonsu to consume its chaotic essence completely, preventing any fragment from surviving to regenerate or contaminate other areas of the cosmos. This consumption process involved more than simple physical ingestion. It required the complete integration of chaotic energy into Khonsu's divine nature, where it could be neutralized through contact with his lunar order. The ancient texts describe this process as temporarily darkening his luminous nature, as the absorbed chaos had to be processed and purified before he could return to his normal divine state. The mythological significance of Khonsu's heart-consuming activities extended beyond simple metaphor to encompass fundamental Egyptian concepts about the relationship between consciousness, moral essence, and divine judgment. The heart represented the seat of individual consciousness and moral character, containing the accumulated record of all thoughts, intentions, and actions that defined a being's essential nature. By consuming the hearts of cosmic enemies, Khonsu was literally absorbing and neutralizing their corrupted consciousness, preventing their evil intentions from manifesting in any form. The process of heart consumption required Khonsu to temporarily take the corrupted consciousness into his own divine awareness, experiencing the full scope of their evil intentions and chaotic desires. This psychological integration represented one of the most dangerous aspects of his role as divine executioner, as prolonged exposure to concentrated evil could potentially corrupt even divine consciousness. The mythological accounts describe elaborate purification rituals that Khonsu performed after each heart consumption, using lunar energy to cleanse his consciousness of any residual chaotic contamination. The supernatural strength that Khonsu manifested during his warrior transformations exceeded that of most other Egyptian deities, reflecting the concentrated power required to confront enemies that threatened the fundamental structure of reality. Temple inscriptions describe feats of divine strength that included tearing apart supernatural fortresses with his bare hands, hurling chaotic entities across dimensional boundaries, and physically restraining cosmic forces that had broken free from their assigned cosmic positions. This strength derived not from physical muscle, but from direct access to the fundamental forces that maintained cosmic stability. The demonstration of this supernatural strength often involved Khonsu's ability to manipulate the fabric of space and time itself, creating localized distortions that could trap enemies or redirect their attacks back upon themselves. He could compress vast distances into manageable spaces, allowing him to pursue fleeing enemies across multiple cosmic realms within moments. Alternatively, he could expand small areas into labyrinthine dimensions where enemies would become lost and disoriented, making them easier targets for his divine weapons. The most impressive displays of Khonsu's supernatural strength involved his battles against entities that had grown to cosmic proportions through the absorption of chaotic energy. These gigantic opponents required divine force on a scale that could reshape celestial geography, with Khonsu's attacks creating new constellations from the scattered remains of destroyed enemies, or forming cosmic barriers that prevented chaotic contamination from spreading to inhabited regions of the universe. The aftermath of these titanic battles often left permanent marks on the celestial landscape that served as warnings to other potential threats. The duality between Khonsu's benevolent healing nature and his terrifying aspect as divine judge created one of the most complex theological paradoxes in Egyptian religious thought. The same divine consciousness that could gently heal a child's fever could transform into an implacable force of cosmic justice that showed no mercy to enemies of divine order. This duality reflected fundamental Egyptian understanding of divine nature as encompassing all aspects of cosmic function, from nurturing creativity to destructive necessity. The transition between these contrasting aspects occurred according to cosmic need, rather than personal preference or emotional state. Khonsu's consciousness remained fundamentally unchanged during his warrior transformations. Only his external manifestation and available powers shifted to meet the requirements of his current divine mission. The gentle healer and the terrible warrior were understood as different expressions of the same essential divine nature, adapted to address different categories of cosmic problems. The theological implications of this duality extended to Egyptian concepts about the nature of justice and the relationship between mercy and judgment. Khonsu's ability to function as both healer and executioner demonstrated that true divine justice required the capacity for both compassion and ruthless enforcement, with the appropriate response determined by the nature of the situation rather than predetermined moral categories. This understanding influenced Egyptian legal and social systems, which sought to balance rehabilitative and punitive approaches according to the specific circumstances of each case. The mythological narratives describing Khonsu's internal experience during warrior transformations reveal sophisticated psychological concepts about the relationship between identity and function in divine consciousness. Unlike mortal beings, whose personality changes might indicate mental instability or moral corruption, Khonsu's transformations represented controlled adaptations that allowed him to fulfill different cosmic responsibilities without losing his essential divine identity. His consciousness expanded to accommodate the additional knowledge and capabilities required for warrior functions, while maintaining continuity with his healing persona. The process of transformation typically began with Khonsu receiving cosmic intelligence about threats requiring his intervention, transmitted through the divine communication networks that connected all members of the Egyptian pantheon. This information would automatically trigger the physiological and psychological changes necessary for warrior function, while his healing consciousness would withdraw to protected areas of his divine awareness, where it could remain uncontaminated by the violence required for cosmic enforcement. The return to his benevolent aspect after completing warrior missions required elaborate purification procedures that cleansed his consciousness of any residual violence or anger that might interfere with his healing functions. These internal purification rituals involved meditation techniques that separated his warrior experiences from his healing memories, preventing psychological contamination that could make him less effective in either role. The successful completion of this purification process was marked by the restoration of his youthful appearance and the return of his gentle, approachable demeanour. The legendary accounts of Khonsu's most significant battles as divine executioner include his confrontation with the rebel stars, a group of stellar deities who had abandoned their assigned positions in the cosmic order to pursue individual power and glory. These rogue celestial beings had begun consuming smaller stars to increase their own luminosity, creating dangerous instabilities in the cosmic structure that threatened the navigational systems used by both divine and mortal travellers. Their rebellion represented a direct challenge to the hierarchical organisation that maintained universal stability. The rebel stars had established themselves in a remote region of the cosmic periphery, where they believed themselves beyond the reach of divine justice. Their leader, a former constellation deity known as the Serpent Bearer, had developed techniques for absorbing stellar energy without destroying the donor stars completely, allowing them to build sustainable power bases that could support extended resistance against cosmic authority. The rebellion had attracted other dissatisfied deities and supernatural entities, creating a growing coalition that posed an existential threat to established divine order. The campaign against the rebel stars required Khonsu to coordinate his efforts with other warrior deities, including Sekhmet, the lioness goddess, and Montu, the falcon-headed god of war. However, the unique nature of stellar combat meant that conventional divine weapons and tactics proved inadequate against enemies who could manipulate cosmic energy directly. Khonsu's lunar nature made him the only deity capable of approaching the rebel stronghold without being detected, as his ability to become invisible during new moon phases allowed him to infiltrate their territory unobserved. The initial reconnaissance mission revealed that the rebel stars had corrupted an entire sector of cosmic space, transforming it into a chaotic realm where normal divine laws no longer functioned reliably. The stellar energy they had stolen was being used to power supernatural weapons and defensive systems that could potentially threaten even major deities like Ra or Amun. The scope of their preparations indicated that they were planning a major assault against the established cosmic order, with the ultimate goal of overthrowing the existing pantheon and installing themselves as the new rulers of the universe. The decisive battle began during a carefully planned new moon phase, when Khonsu's invisibility reached maximum effectiveness. His initial attacks targeted the peripheral defences that protected the rebel stronghold, using his lunar claws to sever the energy conduits that powered their supernatural weapons. the surprise assault caught the rebel stars unprepared for combat against an invisible opponent, allowing Khonsu to eliminate several of their number before they could organise an effective counterattack. The Serpent Bearer's response to Khonsu's assault involved the deployment of captured stellar energy as directed weapons, creating beams of concentrated cosmic force that could have destroyed most deities instantly. However, Khonsu's lunar nature allowed him to absorb and redirect this stellar energy, turning the rebels' own weapons against them in a display of divine martial prowess that demoralised their remaining supporters. The battle's climax occurred when Khonsu engaged the Serpent Bearer in single combat, with the outcome determining the fate of the entire rebellion. The consumption of the Serpent Bearer's heart marked the end of organised stellar rebellion, as the remaining rebel stars surrendered rather than face individual combat against Khonsu's terrible aspect. The absorbed stellar energy was redistributed to its rightful cosmic positions, restoring navigational stability and eliminating the threat to universal order. The victory established Khonsu's reputation as the supreme divine enforcer, capable of confronting and defeating any threat to cosmic stability regardless of its scale or supernatural power. The victory over the rebel stars established Khonsu's authority, not merely as a divine warrior, but as a cosmic administrator whose responsibilities extended into the fundamental mechanisms that govern temporal progression and destiny itself. His lunar cycles had always provided mortals with a natural calendar system, but the ancient Egyptians recognized that his influence over time extended far beyond simple chronological measurement. The regular waxing and waning of the moon represented divine control over the very fabric of temporal existence, with Khonsu serving as the celestial timekeeper whose movements determined not only when events would occur, but how long they would endure and what ultimate outcomes they would produce. The mythological accounts of Khonsu's temporal authority describe his ability to manipulate the flow of time itself, stretching moments into extended periods or compressing years into brief intervals according to cosmic necessity. This power manifested most dramatically during critical historical moments when the fate of kingdoms or the survival of divine order hung in the balance. Temple inscriptions from the New Kingdom preserve detailed narratives of occasions when Khonsu's intervention altered the normal progression of time to allow for divine or mortal heroes to complete crucial missions that would have been impossible under ordinary temporal constraints. One of the most significant demonstrations of Khonsu's chronological dominion occurred during the legendary siege of a fortress city whose defenders had aligned themselves with chaotic forces threatening the stability of Upper Egypt. The siege had dragged on for months without resolution, with the attacking Egyptian forces unable to breach the supernatural defences that protected the rebellious city. The fortress walls had been reinforced with chaotic energy that made them impervious to conventional weapons, while the defenders possessed supernatural stamina that allowed them to maintain their resistance indefinitely without rest or sustenance. The Egyptian commanders, recognizing that conventional military tactics would prove inadequate against supernaturally enhanced opponents, petitioned Khonsu for divine intervention that could tip the balance in favour of cosmic order. The lunar deity's response involved a complex manipulation of temporal flow that created different rates of time passage within and outside the besieged city. While the defenders experienced time at normal speed, the attacking forces found themselves operating within an accelerated temporal field that allowed them to complete months of siege preparations within a single day. This temporal manipulation required Khonsu to establish precise boundaries between different chronological zones, creating invisible barriers that separated areas operating under different temporal conditions. The technical complexity of maintaining multiple simultaneous time streams demanded constant divine attention and enormous expenditure of cosmic energy. Khonsu had to monitor each temporal zone continuously to prevent dangerous interactions between areas operating at different chronological speeds, while simultaneously maintaining the lunar cycles that governed natural processes throughout the rest of Egypt. The accelerated time field allowed the Egyptian forces to construct siege engines, dig tunnels, and prepare assault equipment at supernatural speed, while the defenders remained unaware of the extensive preparations occurring around their city. From the defenders' perspective, the attacking army appeared to be maintaining a static siege position, giving them false confidence in their ability to outlast the Egyptian forces. The temporal deception continued for what the defenders experienced as several weeks, during which the Egyptians completed siege preparations that would normally have required an entire campaign season. The climactic assault began when Khonsu synchronized the different temporal zones, allowing the fully prepared Egyptian forces to launch their attack against defenders who had no warning of the elaborate preparations that had been completed in accelerated time. The supernatural fortress walls, designed to resist conventional siege techniques, proved inadequate against the advanced engineering solutions that the Egyptians had developed during their temporally extended preparation period. The city fell within hours, with the chaotic forces eliminated and cosmic order restored to the region. The mythological significance of this temporal intervention extended beyond military strategy to encompass fundamental Egyptian concepts about the relationship between divine will and historical outcomes. Khonsu's ability to manipulate time demonstrated that divine authority operated outside conventional temporal limitations, with the gods possessing the power to ensure that righteous causes would ultimately prevail regardless of apparent disadvantages in resources or circumstances. This understanding provided theological justification for Egyptian confidence in their eventual victory over any enemies who opposed the cosmic order that their civilization represented. The connection between Khonsu's temporal powers and the measurement of months created one of the most practical applications of his chronological authority. The lunar calendar system that governed Egyptian religious and agricultural activities depended on precise observation of Khonsu's celestial movements, with his monthly cycle providing the fundamental unit for organizing longer-term planning and ritual observances. However, the ancient Egyptians recognized that Khonsu possessed the ability to adjust the length and timing of lunar months according to cosmic necessity, ensuring that celestial cycles remained properly aligned with terrestrial conditions. The most dramatic examples of Khonsu's calendar manipulation occurred during periods when the lunar and solar cycles began to drift out of synchronization, threatening the accuracy of agricultural planning and religious scheduling. Ancient astronomical texts describe occasions when Khonsu would subtly adjust the duration of specific lunar phases to maintain proper alignment between celestial and terrestrial cycles. These adjustments required extraordinary precision, as even minor alterations to lunar timing could have cascading effects on tidal patterns, animal behavior, and plant growth cycles throughout the Nile Valley. The process of calendar correction typically involved Khonsu extending or shortening specific nights during his celestial journey, creating temporal adjustments that were imperceptible to casual observation but significant enough to maintain long-term chronological accuracy. The technical complexity of these adjustments required coordination with Ra's solar movements and the positions of stellar deities, ensuring that all celestial cycles remained properly synchronized despite the temporal modifications necessary for calendar maintenance. The mythological accounts of Khonsu's influence over individual lifespans reveal even more profound applications of his temporal authority. Ancient Egyptian medical and religious texts describe numerous cases where Khonsu's divine intervention extended the lives of individuals whose continued existence served important cosmic purposes. These life extensions involved more than simple healing of physical ailments. They required fundamental alterations to the temporal framework governing individual mortality, essentially slowing the aging process or reversing the effects of time on specific persons. The criteria for receiving such divine intervention were strictly limited to individuals whose extended lifespans would contribute to the maintenance of cosmic order or the completion of crucial divine missions. Pharaohs whose reigns were essential for political stability, priests whose knowledge was required for important religious developments, and scholars whose discoveries would advance human understanding of divine principles could potentially qualify for Khonsu's temporal intervention. However, the decision to extend a mortal lifespan required careful consideration of the cosmic consequences, as such interventions could disrupt the natural balance between life and death that governed universal order. The actual process of lifespan extension involved Khonsu's manipulation of the individual's personal temporal field, creating localized chronological conditions that slowed the aging process without affecting the person's interaction with the normal temporal environment. This required extraordinary precision to ensure that the temporally extended individual could continue to function normally within society, while experiencing a different rate of biological aging. The divine intervention typically manifested as enhanced vitality, improved mental clarity, and resistance to age-related diseases, allowing the recipient to continue their important work for extended periods. The most famous case of Khonsu's lifespan intervention involved a high priest of Thoth, whose astronomical calculations were crucial for maintaining the accuracy of Egyptian calendar systems. This priest, whose name translates as "he who measures the stars," had developed mathematical techniques for predicting celestial events with unprecedented precision, but his advanced age threatened to cut short his work before he could complete crucial calculations needed for long-term calendar reform. Khonsu's intervention extended his active lifespan by several decades, allowing him to complete his astronomical work and train successors in his advanced techniques. The temporal extension manifested through a gradual reversal of the priest's aging process, with his grey hair returning to its original dark colour, his wrinkled skin becoming smooth and supple, and his failing eyesight sharpening to better than normal acuity. However, these physical improvements were accompanied by an acceleration of his mental processes, allowing him to complete complex calculations in a fraction of the time normally required. The combination of extended lifespan and enhanced cognitive abilities enabled him to accomplish decades of work within a compressed time frame, maximizing the benefit of Khonsu's divine intervention. The connection between Khonsu's temporal powers and the determination of fate operated through his ability to perceive and manipulate the causal chains that connected present actions with future outcomes. Ancient Egyptian theological texts describe fate not as predetermined destiny, but as the natural consequence of choices and actions, operating within the framework of cosmic law. Khonsu's lunar journey provided him with a unique perspective on these causal relationships, as his nightly observation of earthly events allowed him to trace the developing patterns that would ultimately determine individual and collective destinies. The process of fate determination involved Khonsu's analysis of the moral and practical consequences of human actions, calculating how specific choices would interact with cosmic principles to produce particular outcomes. This divine computation required consideration of countless variables, including the intentions behind actions, the cosmic timing of events, and the broader implications for universal order. The complexity of these calculations exceeded mortal comprehension, requiring divine intelligence capable of processing multiple simultaneous probability streams and their potential interactions. The manifestation of Khonsu's fate-determining influence typically occurred through the subtle manipulation of circumstances and opportunities that guided individuals toward outcomes consistent with cosmic justice. Rather than imposing arbitrary punishments or rewards, Khonsu would arrange conditions that allowed natural consequences to unfold according to divine law. This approach ensured that justice operated through recognizable cause and effect relationships rather than incomprehensible divine caprice, maintaining mortal confidence in the fundamental fairness of cosmic order. The most significant applications of Khonsu's fate-determining powers involved situations where individual destinies intersected with broader historical developments, creating opportunities for single persons to influence the course of entire civilizations. The divine manipulation of such pivotal moments required extraordinary precision to ensure that the intended historical outcomes would emerge naturally from the choices made by key individuals. Khonsu's interventions typically involved arranging meetings between crucial persons, providing access to important information at critical moments, or creating circumstances that would reveal hidden truths necessary for proper decision-making. The mythological accounts of Khonsu's role in determining royal succession demonstrate the political applications of his fate-determining powers. Ancient Egyptian texts describe several occasions when disputed successions threatened to plunge the kingdom into civil war, with multiple claimants possessing apparently equal legitimacy and support. In these situations, Khonsu's intervention would reveal hidden information or create circumstances that clearly demonstrated which candidate possessed the divine mandate necessary for effective rule. One particularly detailed account describes a succession crisis that occurred when a pharaoh died unexpectedly, without clearly designating his heir among several qualified sons. Each prince possessed strong claims based on different criteria, military achievements, administrative experience, religious devotion, or popular support, making rational selection impossible without triggering violent conflict among their respective factions. The Royal Council's inability to reach consensus threatened to fragment the kingdom at a time when external enemies were preparing to exploit Egyptian weakness. Khonsu's intervention in this succession crisis involved the manipulation of lunar omens that provided clear divine guidance regarding the most suitable candidate. The process began with a series of unusual lunar phenomena that occurred during the funeral ceremonies for the deceased pharaoh, including a partial eclipse that cast distinctive shadows across the royal tomb and unusual coloration of moonlight that seemed to highlight specific hieroglyphic inscriptions. These celestial signs were interpreted by the royal astronomers as divine messages, requiring careful analysis to determine their meaning. The interpretation of these lunar omens required extensive consultation with ancient texts and astronomical records, revealing that the specific combination of celestial phenomena had occurred only once before in Egyptian history, during the reign of a particularly successful pharaoh whose achievements had established lasting prosperity and security. The historical research revealed that this earlier pharaoh had possessed specific personal qualities and accomplishments that matched those of one particular prince among the current candidates, providing clear divine guidance for the succession decision. The prince identified through lunar divination possessed the combination of military skill, administrative competence, and religious devotion that the omens indicated would be necessary for addressing the challenges facing the kingdom. His selection as pharaoh was accepted by all factions as reflecting divine will rather than human preference, preventing the civil conflict that had threatened to destroy Egyptian unity. The successful resolution of the succession crisis through lunar divination enhanced Khonsu's reputation as a reliable source of political guidance and reinforced the legitimacy of divinely sanctioned royal authority. The agricultural applications of Khonsu's temporal powers created some of the most practically significant aspects of his chronological dominion. The timing of planting, irrigation and harvesting activities throughout the Nile Valley depended on precise coordination between lunar cycles and seasonal conditions, with optimal agricultural outcomes requiring careful attention to the complex interactions between celestial movements and terrestrial processes. Khonsu's ability to adjust lunar timing ensured that agricultural activities could be scheduled to take advantage of the most favourable cosmic conditions. The connection between lunar phases and plant growth patterns had been recognised by Egyptian farmers for millennia, with different crops showing varying responses to the waxing and waning of the moon. Seeds planted during specific lunar phases would germinate more successfully, while harvesting conducted under appropriate moonlight conditions would produce crops with enhanced nutritional value and improved storage characteristics. Khonsu's manipulation of lunar timing allowed these natural agricultural advantages to be maximised through precise coordination of farming activities with optimal celestial conditions. The most dramatic examples of Khonsu's agricultural intervention occurred during years when unusual weather patterns or Nile flood conditions threatened crop failures that could have caused widespread famine. In these emergency situations, Khonsu would adjust lunar cycles to create extended growing seasons that allowed farmers to plant additional crops or to accelerate the maturation of existing plantings. These temporal adjustments required careful coordination with other deities responsible for weather and water conditions, ensuring that the modified agricultural schedule would be supported by appropriate environmental conditions. The fertility aspects of Khonsu's temporal authority extended beyond agricultural applications to encompass human reproduction and family planning. Ancient Egyptian medical texts describe the connection between lunar cycles and human fertility, with conception rates varying according to the phase of the moon during which intimate relations occurred. Khonsu's influence over these reproductive cycles allowed him to enhance fertility for couples seeking children or to provide natural family planning guidance for those who wish to time their pregnancies according to social or economic considerations. The most significant fertility interventions involved royal couples whose offspring would inherit political authority and whose genetic health would affect the stability of dynastic succession. Khonsu's manipulation of reproductive timing could ensure that royal children would be conceived under optimal cosmic conditions, maximizing their chances of inheriting the physical and mental qualities necessary for effective rule. These interventions required coordination with other deities responsible for childbirth and child development, creating comprehensive divine support systems for royal reproduction. The seasonal celebrations that honoured Khonsu's temporal authority created elaborate festival cycles that synchronized religious observances with agricultural activities and cosmic events. These celebrations typically occurred during significant lunar phases that coincided with important seasonal transitions, creating community events that reinforced social cohesion while acknowledging divine influence over temporal progression. The festivals involved elaborate rituals that recreated mythological events associated with Khonsu's chronological powers, allowing participants to experience symbolic participation in cosmic time management. The most elaborate seasonal celebrations occurred during the spring planting season, when Khonsu's influence over agricultural timing was most crucial for ensuring successful crop production. These festivals involved community-wide rituals that invoke divine blessing for the coming growing season, while demonstrating proper respect for the temporal powers that governed agricultural success. The celebrations included dramatic reenactments of mythological episodes where Khonsu had manipulated time to ensure favourable outcomes, creating educational entertainment that reinforced understanding of divine temporal authority while providing enjoyable community activities. The agricultural festivals celebrating Khonsu's temporal mastery provided the perfect backdrop for one of the most consequential divine contests in Egyptian mythology, a gambling match that would fundamentally alter the structure of the Egyptian calendar and demonstrate Khonsu's cunning intelligence in ways that surpassed even his prowess as warrior and healer. The contest emerged from a cosmic crisis that threatened the very foundation of temporal order, when the traditional 360-day year began creating dangerous misalignments between celestial cycles and terrestrial seasons. The problem had been developing gradually over centuries, as the slight discrepancy between the lunar solar calendar system and the actual astronomical year accumulated into noticeable seasonal drift. Farmers began reporting that traditional planting times no longer coincided with optimal weather conditions, while religious festivals were occurring during inappropriate seasonal contexts. The royal astronomers calculated that without intervention, the calendar system would eventually become completely divorced from natural cycles, creating agricultural chaos and undermining the religious foundation of the Egyptian civilization. The crisis reached critical proportions when Thoth, the Ibis-headed god of wisdom and keeper of divine records, announced that the accumulated calendar error had reached the point where immediate correction was necessary to prevent cosmic catastrophe. However, the traditional methods for calendar adjustment required the addition of extra days to the year, and divine law prohibited the arbitrary creation of time without proper cosmic authorization. The additional days would need to be obtained through legitimate divine negotiation, creating a theological puzzle that challenged the intellectual capabilities of the entire pantheon. Thoth's solution involved a complex legal interpretation of cosmic law that identified a potential loophole in the regulations governing temporal creation. According to ancient divine statutes, time could be redistributed between different cosmic entities through voluntary agreement, provided that the total amount of temporal energy remained constant. This principle opened the possibility of obtaining additional days for the Egyptian calendar by negotiating with deities who possess surplus temporal resources that they might be willing to trade. The obvious candidate for such negotiation was Khonsu, whose lunar nature gave him direct control over significant quantities of temporal energy in the form of moonlight. Each night, his celestial journey generated luminous energy that accumulated in cosmic reservoirs, creating a substantial temporal resource that could theoretically be redistributed for calendar correction purposes. However, divine protocol required that such redistribution occur through formal contest rather than simple request, ensuring that cosmic resources would only be transferred through demonstrations of superior divine capability. Thoth's challenge to Khonsu took the form of a gaming proposition that would test both deities' intellectual abilities while providing entertainment for the assembled pantheon. The contest would involve a sophisticated board game that combined elements of strategy, chance, and cosmic knowledge, with the winner gaining the right to claim portions of the loser's temporal resources. The specific game chosen was Senet, the ancient Egyptian game of passing that symbolized the soul's journey through the afterlife, and required players to demonstrate both tactical skill and understanding of cosmic principles. The divine gaming board that Thoth created for this contest far exceeded any earthly Senet set in complexity and supernatural properties. Constructed from crystallized starlight and inlaid with precious stones that had been blessed by every major deity, the board possessed the ability to respond to the player's intentions and cosmic alignments. The 30 squares that comprised the playing field were inscribed with hieroglyphic symbols that shifted and changed according to the game's progression, creating dynamic challenges that required constant adaptation of strategy. The gaming pieces themselves were masterworks of divine craftsmanship, carved from meteoric stone and imbued with fragments of the player's own divine essence. Khonsu's pieces glowed with soft lunar radiance and moved with the fluid grace of moonbeams across water, while Thoth's pieces sparkled with the sharp brilliance of stellar wisdom and demonstrated the precise movements characteristic of calculated intelligence. The interaction between these opposing energies created spectacular visual effects that drew observers from throughout the divine realm. The stakes of the contest were precisely defined through divine contract that specified the exact nature of the temporal resources that would change hands depending on the outcome. If Thoth emerged victorious, he would gain the right to claim sufficient moonlight from Khonsu's nightly journey to create 5 additional days for the Egyptian calendar, solving the seasonal drift problem while demonstrating the superiority of wisdom over lunar power. If Khonsu won, he would acquire Thoth's accumulated knowledge regarding calendar calculation, potentially giving him the ability to manipulate temporal systems throughout the cosmos. The contest began during the new moon phase, when Khonsu's competitive instincts were at their sharpest, and his strategic thinking was unencumbered by the gentle influences that characterized his full moon periods. The invisible moon provided optimal conditions for the type of cunning calculation required for high-stakes divine gaming, while the darkness concealed the subtle expressions and body language that might have provided either player with unfair advantages in reading their opponent's intentions. The opening moves of the game revealed the contrasting approaches that each deity brought to the contest. Thoth's strategy emphasized careful calculation and long-term planning, with each piece movement designed to create multiple future options while limiting his opponent's strategic possibilities. His moves demonstrated the methodical precision that had made him the supreme divine administrator, with every decision based on comprehensive analysis of potential consequences and optimal resource allocation. Khonsu's approach reflected his lunar nature through strategies that emphasized adaptation and cyclical thinking. Rather than pursuing linear advancement toward victory, he created complex patterns of peace movement that mirrored the waxing and waning cycles of his celestial journey. His tactical decisions appeared to involve deliberate setbacks and temporary disadvantages that would ultimately position his pieces for devastating counterattacks when cosmic conditions shifted in his favour. The middle phase of the contest witnessed increasingly sophisticated strategic manoeuvres, as both players recognised the exceptional skill of their opponent and adjusted their tactics accordingly. Thoth began incorporating elements of misdirection and psychological manipulation into his normally straightforward approach, attempting to exploit what he perceived as Khonsu's youthful impulsiveness and emotional volatility. These tactical adjustments required him to abandon his preferred methodical style in favour of more aggressive and risky strategies. Khonsu responded to Thoth's psychological pressure by embracing apparent randomness and unpredictability that masked deeper strategic patterns invisible to conventional analysis. His peace movements began following lunar mathematical sequences that created hidden geometric relationships across the gaming board, establishing positional advantages that would only become apparent during specific phases of the game's development. The complexity of these concealed patterns demonstrated intellectual capabilities that surprised even Thoth's vast wisdom. The divine audience that had gathered to witness the contest included representatives from every major temple and cosmic domain, creating the largest assembly of divine beings in Egyptian mythological history. The spectators' reactions to the game's progression provided additional psychological pressure on both players, as their reputations and future authority within the Pantheon depended partly on their performance in this highly visible contest. The crowd's emotional investment in the outcome created an atmosphere of intense excitement that energized both competitors while adding extra stakes to their strategic calculations. The most dramatic moment of the contest occurred when Thoth appeared to achieve a commanding position that would guarantee his victory within a few more moves. His pieces had established control over the crucial central squares of the board, while simultaneously threatening multiple attacks against Khonsu's remaining forces. The mathematical probability of Khonsu's recovery from such a disadvantaged position appeared negligible, leading many observers to begin celebrating Thoth's anticipated triumph and the solution to the calendar crisis. However, Khonsu's response to this apparently hopeless situation demonstrated the type of strategic brilliance that had made him successful in his battles against cosmic enemies. Rather than attempting conventional defensive maneuvers that would only delay inevitable defeat, he executed a series of sacrificial moves that appeared to worsen his position, while actually triggering the hidden geometric patterns he had been developing throughout the game. These seemingly suicidal tactics created a cascade of positional changes that completely reversed the strategic balance of the contest. The geometric activation occurred when Khonsu's remaining pieces achieved specific spatial relationships that resonated with lunar mathematical principles, transforming their individual weaknesses into collective strength that overwhelmed Thoth's carefully constructed advantages. The divine gaming board itself responded to these mathematical harmonies by shifting its hieroglyphic symbols into configurations that favoured lunar strategy over intellectual calculation, creating new tactical possibilities that Thoth's conventional wisdom could not anticipate or counter effectively. The climactic phase of the contest witnessed Khonsu's systematic dismantling of Thoth's position through a combination of tactical brilliance and cosmic timing that demonstrated his mastery of both strategic planning and adaptive improvisation. Each of his moves created multiple threats that forced Thoth into increasingly desperate defensive positions, while simultaneously establishing the foundations for even more devastating attacks in subsequent turns. The complexity of Khonsu's multi-layered strategy exceeded even Thoth's analytical capabilities, creating a situation where the god of wisdom found himself consistently outmaneuvered by an opponent he had underestimated. The decisive moment arrived when Khonsu achieved a position that guaranteed victory regardless of Thoth's response, having created an inescapable tactical trap that would result in the capture of all remaining enemy pieces within the next few moves. The mathematical certainty of this outcome was apparent to all observers, including Thoth himself, who acknowledged his defeat with a gracious dignity befitting a deity of his stature and wisdom. The transfer of temporal resources that followed Khonsu's victory involved one of the most complex magical procedures in Egyptian mythology, requiring the physical extraction of moonlight from Khonsu's divine essence and its transformation into additional calendar days. The process began with Khonsu's voluntary surrender of specific portions of his lunar radiance, creating temporary dimming of the moon that would be barely perceptible to mortal observers but represented significant sacrifice of divine power for the benefit of cosmic order. Thoth's role in this temporal transfer involved the precise calculation and cosmic engineering necessary to transform raw moonlight into functional calendar days that would integrate seamlessly with the existing temporal structure. The 5 additional days, known as the epigomenal days, were inserted between the end of the traditional 360-day year and the beginning of the next annual cycle, creating a transitional period that allowed for proper seasonal adjustment while maintaining the integrity of established religious and agricultural schedules. The mythological significance of these 5 additional days extended far beyond simple calendar correction to encompass fundamental changes in the cosmic order that affected both divine and mortal existence. The epigomenal days were designated as a time outside normal temporal restrictions, when the boundaries between different cosmic realms became more permeable and supernatural events occurred with greater frequency. This liminal period became associated with divine births, prophetic visions and magical practices that required access to cosmic energies normally unavailable during regular calendar time. The creation of the epigomenal days also established Khonsu's reputation as a divine gambler, whose strategic intelligence could overcome opponents with seemingly superior advantages through cunning, patience, and deep understanding of cosmic principles. The victory demonstrated that youthful energy and adaptive thinking could triumph over established wisdom when properly applied, creating a mythological model that influenced Egyptian concepts about the relationship between innovation and tradition in both divine and human affairs. The contest's aftermath saw significant changes in the relationships between various members of the Egyptian pantheon, as Khonsu's demonstration of strategic brilliance earned him new respect and authority within the divine hierarchy. Deities who had previously dismissed him as merely a youthful lunar god began seeking his advice on matters requiring tactical thinking and strategic planning, while his reputation as a formidable opponent in divine contests discouraged challenges from potential rivals who might have questioned his authority. The gambling victory also established precedents for divine contests that would influence future mythological developments throughout Egyptian religious history. The successful resolution of the calendar crisis through competitive gaming demonstrated that cosmic problems could be addressed through intellectual contests rather than violent confrontation, creating alternative models for divine conflict resolution that emphasized cunning and strategic thinking over raw power and destructive capability. The establishment of the epigomenal days through Khonsu's gaming triumph created unprecedented opportunities for his protective influence to extend beyond the traditional boundaries of Egyptian territory. These 5 additional days existed outside normal temporal restrictions, making them ideal for long-distance travel when supernatural dangers were reduced and divine protection was more readily available. Merchants, diplomats, and pilgrims quickly recognized that journeys begun during the epigomenal period enjoyed Khonsu's special favor, leading to the development of elaborate travel rituals that invoked his guidance for dangerous expeditions into foreign lands. The mythological foundation for Khonsu's role as protector of travellers emerged from his nightly celestial journey, which provided him with comprehensive knowledge of all routes, paths and passages throughout the known world. His lunar perspective allowed him to observe the movements of both legitimate travellers and the various supernatural entities that preyed upon vulnerable humans during the dark hours. This omniscient surveillance created a natural protective network where Khonsu could identify threats and provide assistance to those who properly honoured his authority over nocturnal travel. The most detailed accounts of Khonsu's protective interventions describe his assistance to Egyptian merchant caravans crossing the treacherous desert routes that connected the Nile Valley with trading centres in Nubia, the Levant and the distant lands beyond the Red Sea. These commercial expeditions faced numerous dangers that conventional human precautions could not address, including sandstorms that could bury entire caravans, mirages that led travellers astray from established routes, and supernatural predators that hunted human prey in the vast emptiness of the desert wilderness. The protective rituals that invoked Khonsu's guidance for desert travel involved elaborate ceremonies conducted during the 3 nights preceding departure, when the moon's waxing power could be directed toward building supernatural defences around the caravan and its members. The ritual preparations required each traveller to undergo purification procedures that cleansed them of any spiritual contamination that might attract hostile supernatural attention, while the caravan's goods were blessed with lunar-charged amulets that would maintain their protection throughout the journey. The actual departure ceremony took place during the pre-dawn hours when Khonsu's nightly journey was concluding, and his accumulated cosmic intelligence was most readily available for transmission to mortal petitioners. The caravan leader would perform elaborate invocations that requested specific types of divine protection, including guidance towards reliable water sources, warning of approaching sandstorms, and defense against the various categories of supernatural predators that hunted in different desert regions. Khonsu's response to these protective petitions typically manifested through subtle environmental signs that experienced travellers learned to recognise and interpret correctly. Unusual cloud formations would indicate the direction of hidden oases, while specific patterns of wind movement would warn of approaching weather dangers that required immediate shelter or route changes. The behaviour of nocturnal animals, particularly those associated with lunar symbolism such as hares and certain bird species, provided additional guidance that helped caravans avoid dangerous areas or locate essential resources. The most dramatic examples of Khonsu's protective intervention involved his direct confrontation with supernatural entities that threatened travellers under his protection. Desert demons, known for their ability to create false oases that trapped unwary travellers in deadly illusions, found their deceptive powers neutralised by Khonsu's lunar light, which revealed the true nature of their mirages and allowed experienced guides to lead their caravans away from these supernatural traps. The demons' frustrated rage at losing their prey often manifested as sudden sandstorms or equipment failures, but Khonsu's continued protection prevented these retaliatory attacks from causing serious harm. The supernatural predators that posed the greatest threat to desert travellers were the ghouls, shape-shifting entities that could assume human form to infiltrate caravans before revealing their true, monstrous nature to devour their victims. These creatures possessed the ability to mimic the appearance and behaviour of legitimate travellers so perfectly that even experienced caravan leaders could be deceived by their disguises. However, Khonsu's protective influence allowed those under his care to perceive subtle signs that revealed the ghouls' true nature, including shadows that moved independently of their supposed owners, and reflections that showed monstrous forms instead of human appearances. The confrontations between Khonsu's protected travellers and ghoul infiltrators typically occurred during the darkest hours before dawn, when the creature's shape-shifting abilities were strongest, but Khonsu's protective power was also approaching its nightly peak. The divine protection manifested through enhanced perception that allowed caravan members to detect the supernatural predators despite their perfect human disguises, while also providing them with the courage and coordination necessary to drive off or destroy the threatening entities. The most famous account of such confrontation describes a merchant caravan travelling the route between Aswan and the gold mines of the eastern desert, carrying valuable trade goods that had attracted the attention of a particularly powerful ghoul pack. The creatures had been following the caravan for several days, gradually replacing legitimate travellers with their own kind, until nearly half the expedition consisted of supernatural predators waiting for the optimal moment to reveal themselves and slaughter the remaining humans. The ghouls' plan began to unravel when the caravan's lunar-blessed guard animals, particularly the donkeys and camels that carried essential supplies, began displaying signs of supernatural distress that indicated the presence of hostile entities. The animals' behaviour included refusing to approach certain members of the caravan, becoming agitated during specific lunar phases, and making unusual vocalizations that experienced desert travellers recognised as warnings of supernatural danger. The caravan leader's recognition of these warning signs prompted him to conduct emergency protective rituals that strengthened Khonsu's defensive influence around the legitimate travellers while simultaneously revealing the true nature of the ghoul infiltrators. The enhanced divine protection manifested as a subtle luminous aura that surrounded genuine humans, while leaving the supernatural predators exposed in their monstrous forms, creating a clear distinction between friend and enemy that allowed for immediate defensive action. The battle that followed demonstrated the effectiveness of Khonsu's protective intervention when properly invoked and supported by human courage and determination. The legitimate caravan members, bolstered by divine protection and guided by lunar-enhanced perception, were able to coordinate their defensive efforts effectively despite being outnumbered by the ghoul pack. The supernatural predators, deprived of their primary advantage through the loss of their human disguises, found themselves vulnerable to conventional weapons that had been blessed with lunar energy during the protective rituals. The ghouls' defeat and expulsion from the caravan created a protective precedent that enhanced Khonsu's reputation among the merchant communities that depended on desert trade routes for their livelihood. Word of the divine intervention spread through trading networks throughout the region, leading to increased devotion to Khonsu among travellers and the development of more sophisticated protective rituals that incorporated lessons learned from successful defensive encounters. The protective influence that Khonsu extended to Egyptian diplomatic missions created another significant category of travel-related divine intervention. Royal messengers and diplomatic envoys faced unique dangers that combined political threats with supernatural hazards, as their official status made them valuable targets for both human enemies and supernatural entities seeking to disrupt Egyptian foreign relations. The failure of important diplomatic missions could have consequences that extended far beyond individual tragedy to affect the security and prosperity of the entire kingdom. The most significant diplomatic protection mission involved an Egyptian embassy travelling to the Hittite court during a period of tense negotiations over territorial boundaries and trade agreements. The diplomatic party carried crucial documents and gifts that represented months of careful preparation, while the successful arrival and effective negotiation could prevent a potentially devastating war between the two great powers. However, intelligence reports indicated that various factions within both kingdoms opposed the peace negotiations and might attempt to sabotage the mission through violent intervention. The supernatural dimensions of the threat became apparent when the embassy encountered a series of increasingly dangerous incidents that exceeded normal hazards of international travel. Equipment failures occurred with suspicious frequency, while guide animals displayed behaviour indicating the presence of hostile supernatural forces that were actively working to prevent the mission's success. The embassy's Egyptian prescribe, trained in recognising supernatural interference, identified these incidents as evidence of coordinated magical attack, rather than natural misfortune. The priest's analysis of the supernatural threats revealed that enemy sorcerers were employing desert spirits and other hostile entities, to create obstacles that would delay or destroy the Egyptian embassy without leaving evidence of deliberate sabotage. This indirect approach allowed the responsible parties to maintain plausible deniability, while effectively preventing successful diplomatic contact between the Egyptian and Hittite governments. The sophisticated nature of the magical assault indicated that highly trained practitioners were directing the supernatural attacks. The embassy's response to this supernatural warfare involved emergency appeals to Khonsu's protective authority, conducted according to diplomatic protocols that had been developed for situations where Egyptian official missions face supernatural threats in foreign territory. The rituals required careful adaptation to local conditions while maintaining the essential elements necessary for invoking divine protection, creating hybrid ceremonies that respected both Egyptian religious traditions and the diplomatic requirements of operating in neutral territory. Khonsu's intervention in this diplomatic crisis involved the deployment of protective lunar energy that created a mobile sanctuary around the Egyptian embassy, shielding them from supernatural attack while allowing them to continue their journey toward the Hittite capital. The divine protection manifested as enhanced navigation abilities that allowed the embassy to find optimal routes despite deliberate misdirection from hostile spirits, while also providing early warning of supernatural ambushes that might have otherwise caught them unprepared. The most dramatic aspect of Khonsu's diplomatic protection involved his direct confrontation with the enemy sorcerers who were directing the supernatural assault against the Egyptian embassy. The lunar deity's intervention took the form of dream invasions that disrupted the enemy practitioners' concentration during their magical workings, causing their spells to backfire or dissipate harmlessly instead of affecting their intended targets. The psychological warfare conducted through dream manipulation proved more effective than direct supernatural combat, as it undermined the sorcerer's confidence while avoiding the escalation that might have resulted from overt divine intervention. The successful completion of the diplomatic mission and the subsequent peace agreement between Egypt and the Hittite kingdom established Khonsu's reputation as a reliable protector of international relations, leading to his formal incorporation into the diplomatic protocols used by Egyptian foreign missions. Future embassies would routinely include priests trained in invoking Khonsu's protection, while diplomatic gifts often included lunar-themed artwork that honoured his role in facilitating successful international negotiations. The protection that Khonsu extended to religious pilgrims created the most spiritually significant category of his travel-related interventions. Pilgrims journeying to distant shrines and sacred sites faced unique dangers that combined physical hazards with spiritual challenges, as their religious devotion made them particularly attractive targets for supernatural entities that sought to corrupt or destroy genuine faith. The successful completion of pilgrimage journeys required divine protection that could address both earthly and spiritual threats. The most challenging pilgrimage routes involved journeys to remote desert shrines, where ancient deities maintained sacred sites that required periodic visitation by devoted worshippers. These locations were often situated in areas where the boundary between the ordered world and primordial chaos remained thin, creating conditions where supernatural dangers were particularly intense. Pilgrims travelling to such sites needed protection that could shield them from chaotic influences while allowing them to access the spiritual benefits of their religious devotion. The protective rituals for pilgrimage travel involved purification procedures that prepared pilgrims spiritually for their encounter with sacred sites, while also creating supernatural defences against the various categories of entities that preyed upon religious travellers. The purification process required pilgrims to abandon worldly concerns and focus their consciousness entirely on their spiritual objectives, creating mental states that were naturally resistant to supernatural manipulation, while also making them more receptive to divine guidance. Khonsu's guidance for pilgrim travellers typically manifested through inspirational dreams that provided specific directions for reaching sacred sites while avoiding dangerous areas where chaotic entities maintained their strongest presence. The divine communications included detailed information about optimal travel timing, necessary supplies and preparations, and the specific ritual procedures required for safely approaching and departing from each sacred location. The complexity of this guidance required pilgrims to possess considerable religious training and spiritual discipline to interpret and follow the divine instructions correctly. The most remarkable pilgrimage protection involved a group of priests travelling to a remote shrine dedicated to an ancient star goddess whose cult predated the rise of organised Egyptian religion. The shrine was located in a desert valley where cosmic energies created unusual supernatural conditions that could be either beneficial or extremely dangerous, depending on the spiritual preparation and intentions of visitors. Previous pilgrimage attempts had resulted in the mysterious disappearance of several religious parties, creating a reputation that deterred all but the most devoted worshippers from attempting the journey. The surviving accounts of this pilgrimage describe how Khonsu's protection manifested through a series of supernatural guides that appeared to assist the pilgrims during the most dangerous portions of their journey. These guides took the form of luminous figures that resembled idealized humans, but possessed an otherworldly quality that marked them as divine messengers rather than ordinary mortals. The guides provided crucial assistance in navigating the complex supernatural geography surrounding the shrine, while also offering protection against the various chaotic entities that inhabited the region. The pilgrims' successful completion of their religious mission and safe return to civilization established new protocols for dangerous pilgrimage travel that incorporated lessons learned from Khonsu's protective intervention. These protocols emphasized the importance of proper spiritual preparation, the necessity of invoking divine protection through appropriate rituals, and the value of maintaining faith and determination even when faced with apparently insurmountable supernatural obstacles. The successful establishment of pilgrimage protection protocols marked only one facet of Khonsu's supernatural versatility, as his divine nature encompassed far more dramatic transformations that reflected the moon's own capacity for radical change. The gentle healer who guided pilgrims through treacherous desert routes could undergo complete metamorphosis when cosmic circumstances demanded different divine capabilities, shifting from benevolent protector to terrifying predator, from youthful guide to ancient wisdom keeper, from luminous beacon to invisible shadow, depending on the specific challenges that required his intervention. These transformations represented fundamental alterations in Khonsu's divine essence, rather than simple changes in appearance or demeanour. His consciousness would restructure itself to accommodate entirely different sets of divine powers and responsibilities, while his physical manifestation adapted to match the cosmic role he needed to fulfill. The process involved the temporary suppression of certain aspects of his personality while amplifying others, creating specialized divine personas that were optimized for specific categories of supernatural challenges. The most frequently documented transformation involved Khonsu's shift from his familiar youthful appearance to that of a fully mature adult deity, whose presence commanded immediate respect and obedience from both mortals and lesser supernatural entities. This adult manifestation typically occurred when situations required authoritative intervention that exceeded the capabilities associated with his childlike persona, particularly in dealing with rebellious spirits or chaotic entities that might not take commands from an apparently young deity seriously. The physical changes accompanying this maturation transformation were both subtle and profound, beginning with the disappearance of the distinctive sidelock of youth that normally marked his divine childhood. His facial features would sharpen and mature, gaining the weathered wisdom lines that indicated extensive experience with cosmic responsibilities, while his voice would deepen to carry the resonant authority that commanded attention from vast distances. His normally slender build would fill out with the muscular development appropriate to a deity who had spent eons wrestling with supernatural forces and cosmic challenges. The psychological aspects of this transformation involved the integration of accumulated experiences from all his previous interventions in mortal and divine affairs, creating a consciousness that possessed comprehensive understanding of both individual psychology and cosmic principles. This mature Khonsu could anticipate the likely responses of various personality types to different approaches, allowing him to select the most effective methods for achieving his objectives, whether through persuasion, intimidation, or direct supernatural compulsion. The circumstances that typically triggered this adult transformation included diplomatic crises, where Khonsu needed to negotiate with other major deities as an equal, rather than a junior member of the pantheon, military situations where his authority over subordinate divine forces required unquestionable legitimacy, and complex supernatural problems that demanded the type of comprehensive analysis that only mature divine wisdom could provide. The transformation allowed him to access knowledge and capabilities that were normally restricted to elder deities while maintaining his essential lunar nature and specialized powers. The reverse transformation, from adult authority figure back to youthful protector, involved the careful suppression of the accumulated wisdom and experience that characterized his mature persona, allowing the natural optimism and adaptability of divine youth to reassert itself. This process required considerable effort to prevent the cynicism and caution that came with extensive experience from permanently altering his fundamental nature, maintaining the balance between wisdom and innocence that made him effective in his various divine roles. The animal transformations that Khonsu could undergo represented even more dramatic alterations in his divine nature, as they involved the complete restructuring of his consciousness to accommodate non-human thought patterns and sensory capabilities. These transformations were typically reserved for situations where human or humanoid divine forms would be inadequate for addressing specific supernatural challenges, requiring capabilities that could only be accessed through animal consciousness and physiology. The baboon transformation was among the most frequently employed animal forms, reflecting ancient Egyptian associations between lunar cycles and the behavior of these intelligent primates. The transformation process began with Khonsu's human features elongating and reshaping themselves into the distinctive muzzle and facial structure of a large male baboon, while his hands and feet developed the specialized anatomy necessary for both terrestrial locomotion and arboreal navigation. His divine consciousness adapted to accommodate the enhanced sensory capabilities that came with baboon physiology, including superior night vision, acute hearing, and the ability to detect subtle chemical signals that provided information about supernatural presence and emotional states. The baboon form provided Khonsu with unique advantages for certain types of divine missions, particularly those involving infiltration of supernatural territories, where human or humanoid presence would immediately alert hostile entities to divine intervention. The animal form allowed him to move through dangerous areas without triggering the defensive responses that his normal divine appearance would provoke, while the baboon's natural intelligence and problem-solving abilities complemented his own divine wisdom to create enhanced analytical capabilities. The psychological aspects of the baboon transformation involved the integration of primal instincts and emotional responses that were normally suppressed in his humanoid forms. The animal consciousness provided access to intuitive knowledge about territorial boundaries, social hierarchies, and threat assessment that operated below the level of rational analysis, allowing Khonsu to navigate complex supernatural situations through instinctive responses that complemented his intellectual understanding of cosmic principles. The most significant application of the baboon transformation occurred during Khonsu's investigation of supernatural disturbances in the sacred groves that surrounded certain temple complexes, where mysterious disappearances of temple personnel had created fears of supernatural predation. The human investigators who had attempted to solve these mysteries had found no evidence of natural predators or human criminals, while their presence in the groves seemed to cause the responsible entities to cease their activities temporarily, preventing effective investigation of the ongoing threats. Khonsu's baboon form allowed him to conduct surveillance of the sacred groves without alerting the supernatural predators to divine investigation, as his animal appearance provided perfect camouflage for extended observation of their hunting patterns and territorial behaviour. The enhanced sensory capabilities of baboon physiology enabled him to detect subtle signs of supernatural presence that would have been imperceptible to human senses, including chemical traces left by otherworldly entities and electromagnetic disturbances that indicated dimensional instabilities. The investigation revealed that the grove disturbances were caused by shadow feeders, supernatural parasites that existed in the spaces between dimensions and sustained themselves by consuming the life force of living beings. These entities had established feeding territories within the sacred groves, using the spiritual energy generated by religious activities to mask their presence while they slowly drained the vitality from temple personnel who entered their hunting grounds. The shadow feeders' interdimensional nature made them extremely difficult to detect through conventional divine senses, requiring the specialized perception capabilities that only animal consciousness could provide. The elimination of the shadow feeder infestation required Khonsu to maintain his baboon form throughout an extended campaign that involved tracking the creatures to their dimensional hiding places and destroying their connection points to the physical world. The animal form's enhanced agility and climbing abilities allowed him to pursue the entities through this complex three-dimensional terrain of the grove canopy, while his divine powers remained fully accessible despite the physical transformation. The Ibis transformation represented a different category of animal metamorphosis, one that provided Khonsu with capabilities specifically suited for aerial reconnaissance and long-distance communication missions. The bird form offered unique advantages for gathering intelligence about supernatural activities occurring across vast geographical areas, while the ibis's traditional associations with wisdom and divine knowledge made it an appropriate form for missions involving the collection and analysis of complex information. The physical transformation into ibis form involved the radical restructuring of Khonsu's anatomy to accommodate flight capabilities, with his arms extending and reshaping themselves into powerful wings, while his bones became hollow to reduce weight without sacrificing structural strength. His divine consciousness adapted to process the enhanced visual information available through avian eyesight, which could detect subtle variations in light and movement that were invisible to terrestrial observers, while also accommodating the spatial reasoning capabilities necessary for three-dimensional navigation. The ibis form's most significant advantage lay in its ability to access aerial perspectives that revealed patterns and relationships invisible from ground level. Supernatural activities that appeared random and disconnected, when observed from terrestrial viewpoints, often displayed clear organizational structures when viewed from appropriate altitude, allowing Khonsu to identify the controlling intelligences behind apparently chaotic supernatural events and develop effective countermeasures against coordinated supernatural threats. The most complex application of the Ibis transformation involved Khonsu's investigation of the supernatural conspiracy that was attempting to disrupt Egyptian agricultural activities through coordinated attacks on irrigation systems throughout the Nile Delta. The sabotage activities appeared to be random acts of vandalism when examined individually, but the cumulative effect was creating systematic water shortages that threatened crop production across multiple provinces. Ground-based investigations had failed to identify any connection between the various incidents or to locate the responsible parties. Khonsu's aerial reconnaissance in Ibis form revealed that the sabotage activities followed a precise geometric pattern that was designed to maximize agricultural disruption while minimizing the risk of detection by Egyptian authorities. The pattern was only visible from high altitude, where the relationships between different attack sites became apparent as components of a larger supernatural working that was intended to weaken Egypt's agricultural foundation and create conditions for foreign invasion or internal rebellion. The identification of this geometric pattern allowed Khonsu to predict future attack sites and position himself to intercept the supernatural saboteurs before they could complete their destructive missions. The Ibis form's flight capabilities enabled him to respond rapidly to threats occurring across the vast expanse of the Delta region, while his divine powers allowed him to neutralize the supernatural entities responsible for the sabotage without causing collateral damage to the irrigation infrastructure they were attempting to destroy. The discovery that the sabotage conspiracy was being directed by agents of a hostile foreign power who had recruited supernatural allies for their campaign against Egyptian agriculture led to broader divine intervention that involved multiple deities working together to eliminate the threat. Khonsu's intelligence gathering in Ibis form provided the crucial information that allowed the Egyptian pantheon to coordinate an effective response that not only stopped the immediate sabotage campaign, but also prevented future attempts at supernatural warfare against Egyptian infrastructure. The Falcon transformation, while less commonly documented than the Baboon and Ibis forms, represented Khonsu's most aggressive animal manifestation, one that was typically reserved for situations requiring direct supernatural combat rather than reconnaissance or investigation. The Falcon form provided enhanced speed and aerial maneuverability that made it ideal for pursuing and attacking flying supernatural enemies, while the bird's natural predatory instincts complemented Khonsu's divine warrior capabilities to create a formidable aerial combatant. The physical transformation into Falcon form involved the development of razor-sharp talons and a hooked beak that could tear through both physical and supernatural substance, while the bird's enhanced visual acuity allowed for precise targeting of vulnerable points on supernatural opponents. The falcon's natural hunting instincts provided Khonsu with enhanced tactical awareness that operated through intuitive pattern recognition rather than conscious analysis, allowing for split-second combat decisions that could mean the difference between victory and defeat in aerial supernatural combat. The psychological integration required for Falcon transformation involved embracing the predatory mindset that characterized successful hunters, including the patience to wait for optimal attack opportunities and the ruthless determination to pursue prey until it was completely eliminated. This mental state represented a significant departure from Khonsu's normal, compassionate nature, requiring careful psychological preparation to prevent the predatory instincts from contaminating his other divine personas. The symbolic significance of Khonsu's various transformations extended beyond their practical applications to encompass fundamental Egyptian concepts about the relationship between divine nature and cosmic function. Each transformation represented a different aspect of lunar power, from the wisdom-seeking nature of the Ibis to the protective instincts of the Baboon to the predatory efficiency of the Falcon. The ability to shift between these different manifestations demonstrated that divine authority required adaptability and specialized responses rather than rigid adherence to single approaches. The lunar phases that governed the timing of these transformations created additional layers of symbolic meaning that influenced both religious understanding and practical applications of Khonsu's shape-shifting abilities. The waxing moon phases were most conducive to transformations that involved growth and development, such as the maturation from child to adult, or the expansion of consciousness required for animal forms. The full moon provided optimal conditions for transformations that required maximum divine power, while the waning phases were suited for transformations that involved the suppression or concealment of normal divine attributes. The new moon phases, when Khonsu's normal luminous presence was invisible in the night sky, created ideal conditions for transformations that required complete concealment of divine identity. During these periods, his animal forms could operate with perfect camouflage, as even supernatural entities with enhanced perception would have difficulty detecting divine presence within apparently ordinary animal consciousness. These invisible transformations provided Khonsu with unparalleled opportunities for covert intelligence gathering and surprise attacks against unsuspecting supernatural enemies. The integration of multiple transformation capabilities within Khonsu's divine consciousness required sophisticated psychological mechanisms that prevented the various animal instincts and thought patterns from interfering with each other or contaminating his primary humanoid persona. The successful management of these multiple identities demonstrated divine psychological flexibility that exceeded the capabilities of most other Egyptian deities, who typically maintained more consistent personalities and manifestations throughout their mythological careers. The training procedures that allowed Khonsu to master these various transformations involved extensive practice in controlled environments where mistakes would not have catastrophic consequences for cosmic order or mortal welfare. The learning process required him to experience each transformation repeatedly until the psychological and physical changes became automatic responses to specific cosmic conditions, while also developing the mental discipline necessary to maintain his essential divine identity, despite radical alterations in consciousness and capabilities. The mythological accounts of Khonsu's transformation abilities influenced Egyptian magical practices that sought to replicate divine shapeshifting through ritual procedures and supernatural techniques. While mortal practitioners could never achieve the complete transformations that characterized divine metamorphosis, they could develop limited abilities to adopt certain animal characteristics, or to shift their consciousness in ways that provided access to enhanced sensory capabilities or specialized knowledge associated with different animal forms. The mastery of transformation abilities that allowed Khonsu to shift between human, animal, and elemental forms represented only the foundation of his most profound divine attribute, his eternal nature that transcended the cyclical patterns governing other Egyptian deities. While most gods experienced periods of ascendancy and decline corresponding to seasonal changes, political developments, or cosmic cycles, Khonsu's lunar essence guaranteed his continuous presence throughout all temporal phases. His monthly death during the new moon and subsequent rebirth as the crescent appeared created a perpetual renewal cycle that made him immune to the gradual diminishment that eventually affected even the most powerful deities. The theological implications of this eternal nature became particularly significant during periods of cosmic crisis, when the fundamental structure of Egyptian religious understanding faced existential threats. Ancient prophetic texts, preserved in the deepest temple archives, described apocalyptic scenarios where traditional deities would withdraw from active involvement in mortal affairs, leaving humanity vulnerable to chaotic forces that sought to unravel the ordered universe. However, these same prophecies consistently identified Khonsu as the one deity whose lunar nature would allow him to maintain his protective influence, even during the darkest periods of cosmic dissolution. The prophetic literature describing these end-time scenarios presented detailed accounts of how Khonsu's eternal wandering would continue even when the solar bark of Ra ceased its daily journey and the annual flood cycles of the Nile came to an end. His lunar orbit would persist as the last vestige of cosmic order, providing a celestial beacon that would guide surviving humans through the chaos while simultaneously maintaining the temporal framework necessary for eventual cosmic renewal. The moon's phases would continue to mark the passage of time, even when all other chronological systems had collapsed, ensuring that the concept of cyclical progression would survive to support future reconstruction of divine order. The mythological narratives describing Khonsu's role during these cosmic end times revealed sophisticated theological concepts about the relationship between destruction and renewal in Egyptian religious thought. The apocalyptic scenarios were not understood as permanent endings, but as necessary purification processes that would eliminate accumulated cosmic corruption and create conditions for renewed divine creation. Khonsu's survival through these purification cycles positioned him as the crucial link between the old cosmic order and its eventual successor, carrying forward essential divine knowledge and maintaining continuity of lunar influence across the transition periods. The specific mechanisms through which Khonsu would maintain his protective functions during cosmic dissolution involved his unique ability to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensional planes, a capability that derived from his nightly journey between the visible world and the hidden underworld realms. While other deities might be constrained by the collapse of specific cosmic domains, Khonsu's multidimensional presence would allow him to withdraw to protected, dimensional spaces where he could preserve essential divine functions until conditions permitted their restoration to normal reality. The most detailed prophetic accounts described how Khonsu would establish mobile sanctuaries within the lunar sphere itself, creating protected spaces where devoted humans could survive the cosmic purification while maintaining their connection to divine guidance. These lunar refugees would operate according to accelerated time streams that allow their inhabitants to experience extended periods of safety and spiritual development while only brief moments passed in the chaos-dominated external reality. The temporal manipulation would ensure that the survivors emerged from their lunar sanctuary with enhanced spiritual capabilities that would be essential for participating in cosmic reconstruction. The selection criteria for admission to these lunar sanctuaries reflected fundamental Egyptian values about the relationship between individual character and cosmic responsibility. The prophecies specified that candidates for lunar protection would be evaluated based on their demonstrated commitment to maintaining divine order through their daily actions, their willingness to sacrifice personal interests for the benefit of cosmic stability, and their possession of specialized knowledge or skills that would be essential for post-apocalyptic reconstruction efforts. The prophetic literature also described how Khonsu's eternal nature would manifest through his continued influence over royal legitimacy and divine kingship, even during periods when traditional pharaonic authority had collapsed due to cosmic disruption. His lunar cycles would continue to provide the celestial validation necessary for legitimate rule, with potential leaders required to demonstrate their divine mandate through their ability to correctly interpret lunar omens and coordinate their actions with the phases of the moon. This lunar-based legitimacy would serve as a backup system for maintaining political order when conventional sources of royal authority were no longer available. The mechanisms through which Khonsu would validate royal claims during these crisis periods involved complex divination procedures that required candidates for leadership to demonstrate their understanding of lunar symbolism and their ability to receive direct communication from the lunar deity. The validation process would include tests of the candidate's capacity to predict lunar phases accurately, their skill in interpreting the meaning of unusual lunar phenomena, and their success in invoking Khonsu's protection for communities under their authority. The most significant aspect of these royal validation procedures involved the candidate's ability to maintain lunar temple functions, even when traditional religious infrastructure had been destroyed or abandoned. The potential ruler would be required to demonstrate competence in conducting essential lunar rituals using improvised materials and simplified procedures that could be implemented under emergency conditions. This practical test would ensure that lunar-validated leadership possessed the religious knowledge necessary to maintain divine connection during periods of social and institutional collapse. The prophetic accounts of Khonsu's role in cosmic renewal cycles described elaborate reconstruction procedures that would begin with his establishment of new lunar temples in locations determined through divine guidance, rather than traditional geographical considerations. These renewal temples would serve as focal points for gathering survivors and organizing reconstruction efforts, while also providing the ritual infrastructure necessary for invoking divine assistance in rebuilding damaged cosmic systems. The architectural specifications for these renewal temples reflected adaptations to post-apocalyptic conditions that might lack the resources and skilled craftsmen available during normal periods. The temple designs emphasized functionality over ornamental elaboration, with simplified layouts that could be constructed using locally available materials while still maintaining the essential spatial relationships necessary for effective lunar worship. The altar configurations would be designed to maximize the concentration of lunar energy within compact spaces, allowing for powerful ritual effects even when the temple structures themselves were modest in scale. The ritual procedures conducted within these renewal temples would combine traditional lunar worship elements with emergency adaptations designed to address the specific challenges of post-apocalyptic reconstruction. The ceremonies would emphasize community participation and mutual support, with individual spiritual development integrated into collective efforts to restore social order and divine connection. The lunar cycles would provide the temporal framework for organizing these reconstruction activities, with different phases of the moon designated for specific categories of renewal work. The legendary accounts of Khonsu's continued influence throughout Egyptian history demonstrated how his eternal nature manifested through persistent involvement in dynastic succession and royal legitimacy, even during periods of political instability and foreign domination. Historical records from various periods of Egyptian weakness, including the intermediate periods when central authority collapsed and foreign rulers controlled portions of Egyptian territory, consistently reference lunar omens and divine guidance that helped legitimate Egyptian leaders maintain their claims to divine kingship despite adverse political circumstances. The most documented examples of this persistent influence occurred during the Second Intermediate Period, when Hyksos rulers controlled northern Egypt while native Egyptian dynasties maintained precarious authority in the south. The historical records from Theban sources describe numerous occasions when lunar omens provided crucial guidance for Egyptian resistance efforts, including the timing of military campaigns, the selection of alliance partners, and the coordination of diplomatic initiatives designed to expel the foreign occupiers. The lunar guidance during this period of foreign occupation involved sophisticated intelligence operations that utilized Khonsu's nightly surveillance capabilities to gather information about Hyksos military dispositions and political intentions. The divine intelligence was transmitted to Egyptian leaders through dreams and omens that provided detailed tactical information while maintaining the appearance of natural prophetic phenomena that would not alert the occupying forces to the existence of supernatural assistance for Egyptian resistance efforts. The successful expulsion of the Hyksos and restoration of native Egyptian rule under the 18th dynasty was attributed partly to Khonsu's continued support for legitimate pharaonic authority, with the victory celebrations including elaborate lunar festivals that acknowledged his role in maintaining divine kingship through the period of foreign domination. These commemorative celebrations established precedents for honouring Khonsu's protective influence that continued throughout subsequent periods of Egyptian independence and imperial expansion. The synthesis of Khonsu's various mythological roles into a comprehensive divine personality revealed the sophisticated theological development that characterized mature Egyptian religious thought. His evolution from the fearsome heart-eating deity of the pyramid texts to the beloved healer and protector of the new kingdom demonstrated how Egyptian religious understanding could adapt and develop while maintaining continuity with ancient traditions. The various aspects of his divine nature — warrior, healer, timekeeper, protector, and eternal wanderer — were not contradictory elements but complementary facets of a unified cosmic function that encompassed all aspects of lunar influence on both divine and mortal existence. The theological integration of these diverse roles required sophisticated understanding of how different divine functions could coexist within a single divine consciousness without creating internal conflicts or contradictory influences. The ancient Egyptian priests who developed Khonsu's mature theological profile recognized that lunar power naturally encompassed both creative and destructive aspects, both protective and challenging influences, both visible and hidden operations. The successful integration of these apparent opposites created a divine personality that reflected the full complexity of lunar phenomena, while maintaining coherent identity and consistent moral character. The influence of this theological synthesis extended beyond purely religious considerations to shape Egyptian concepts about leadership, personal development, and social organisation. Khonsu's example demonstrated how individual identity could encompass multiple roles and responsibilities without losing essential character, while his eternal nature provided a model for continuity through change that influenced Egyptian approaches to dynastic succession, institutional development, and cultural preservation. The enduring legacy of Khonsu's mythological development continued to influence Egyptian religious thought throughout the Ptolemaic period and into the Roman occupation, with lunar symbolism and temporal themes maintaining their significance even as traditional Egyptian religious practices adapted to changing political and cultural conditions. The fundamental concepts associated with his worship, the importance of cyclical renewal, the value of protective guidance, the necessity of adaptive leadership, and the promise of eternal continuity provided theological resources that helped Egyptian religious traditions survive periods of foreign rule and cultural transformation. The ultimate significance of Khonsu's eternal wanderer status lay in his embodiment of the fundamental Egyptian belief that divine order would persist through all temporal changes and cosmic challenges. His nightly journey across the heavens served as a perpetual reminder that divine protection remained available to those who maintained proper relationships with cosmic principles, while his monthly cycle of death and rebirth demonstrated that renewal was always possible regardless of how complete destruction might appear. The eternal nature of his celestial wandering provided assurance that divine guidance would continue to be available throughout all future ages, maintaining the connection between human civilization and cosmic order that formed the foundation of Egyptian religious understanding. As the moon continues its eternal dance across the night sky, Khonsu's legacy endures as a testament to the power of divine protection, the promise of cyclical renewal, and the assurance that even in the darkest hours, celestial guidance remains available to those who know how to seek it. His mythological journey from terrifying cosmic predator to beloved divine protector reflects humanity's own spiritual evolution, while his eternal wandering serves as a perpetual reminder that divine presence persists through all temporal changes, maintaining the sacred connection between earth and heaven that forms the foundation of cosmic order itself.